Across the world, archaeologists have uncovered places once believed to be doors to other realms. From caves and temples to pyramids and hidden tunnels, these sites were built with a purpose that went beyond stone and soil. Each carries traces of rituals, alignments, and beliefs that tried to connect the living with the unseen. This journey follows the discoveries and the people who found them, real places where myth and earth still meet. Oracle of the Dead on the Acheron, Greece. We begin not at the gate of a temple, but beside a quiet river in northwestern Greece. The Acheron flows through deep valleys and limestone hills, its dark water slow and heavy. In ancient times, people believed this river marked the border between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The name itself meant joyless. To cross it was to leave sunlight behind. In the Greek imagination, this place was more than a landscape. It was a passage. Homer wrote that Odysseus came here to call on the shades of the dead. Herodotus later told how the tyrant Periander of Corinth sent messengers to the same place to question his deceased wife. For centuries, stories repeated the same idea. Somewhere near the Acheron there stood an oracle where the living could speak with the dead. When archaeologists began digging near the village of Mesopotamos in the 1950s, they thought they had found it. The hill overlooked the joining of the Acheron, with two other rivers mentioned in myth, Cocytus and Phlegethon. The match felt perfect. Excavations uncovered a heavy stone building with thick walls and underground rooms. There were stairways that descended into darkness, a labyrinth of corridors and a great vaulted chamber cut into the rock beneath. To many, this looked exactly like a house of the dead described by ancient writers. The site soon became known as the Necromanteon of Acheron, the Oracle of the Dead. Visitors imagined pilgrims coming here 2,000 years ago, fasting for days, offering sacrifices, and then being led into the dark underworld chamber to hear the voices of spirits. Ancient accounts speak of iron doors, smoke, torchlight, the smell of blood and incense. People believed the priests could call souls from below. The archaeologists' reports described what they found: fragments of pottery, lamps, small clay figurines, and the remains of animal bones, signs of ritual. The lower chamber was supported by 15 stone arches. Its silence was so deep that a single word could seem to hang in the air. They found evidence of stairways once sealed by heavy wooden doors. Everything pointed toward mystery and initiation. But as more experts examined the site, new questions began to surface. The masonry style of the walls suggested the building dated from the late 4th or early 3rd century before Christ, centuries later than Homer's time. Some finds didn't fit a purely sacred purpose. Among the objects were bronze washers and fittings identified as parts of ancient catapults. There were millstones and agricultural tools, suggesting a fortified estate rather than a temple. The building stood on a hilltop, not beside the riverbank where most imagined the entrance to Hades should be. Gradually, doubts grew. Some archaeologists proposed that this was not the true oracle described by Herodotus and Homer, but a later fortified structure, perhaps with a small local shrine added afterward. The famous identification began to unravel. The so-called underground chamber might simply have been a storeroom or cistern, later filled with debris from Roman destruction. Yet the legend could not be erased. The finds still spoke of ritual life. Hundreds of vases, oil lamps, terracotta idols, and figurines of Persephone and Hades. The presence of these deities, guardians of the underworld, kept the association alive. The place might have changed over time, but the idea of it as a gateway endured. Standing in that chamber today, the atmosphere is undeniable. The air is still, the stone walls damp and close. Sound moves strangely, flattening and fading as if swallowed by the earth itself. It is easy to understand why the ancients would have felt they stood on the threshold of another world. Pilgrims fasting in darkness, their senses heightened, would have felt the unseen draw near. The physical evidence and the literary tradition do not fully agree. The texts describe a sanctuary older than the ruins we see. The ruins reveal both sacred and military use. Between the two lies a space of uncertainty, where myth and matter overlap. What can be said for certain is that this region of Epirus was regarded as a crossing point between worlds. The three rivers still meet there, as they did in the stories. The villagers still call the site the Gates of Hades. Whether or not the excavated complex was truly the oracle of legend, the symbolism of the place endures. The descent through narrow halls, the echoing chamber, the nearness of the rivers all reinforce a feeling that one is moving towards something beyond ordinary space. Ancient travellers came seeking answers from the dead. Modern visitors come seeking traces of belief itself. In the end, the Necromantion of Acheron stands as both an archaeological puzzle and a mirror of human longing. Stones speak of defence and storage. Stories speak of ritual and revelation. The river flows between them, silent and dark, just as it has for thousands of years. Malta's Halsaflieni Hypogeum. Soft footsteps echo in darkness, slow and deliberate. Beneath the surface of a quiet Maltese hill in Paola, carved deep into the soft Globigerina limestone, lies a chamber hewn in the Neolithic age, a place where voice and stone meet in strange resonance. The Hypogeum of Halsaflieni was not meant simply to house the dead. It was built so that whisper and chant might travel in ways we still struggle to understand. Imagine entering that subterranean world for the first time. You descend along narrow rock-cut steps. The air is cool, the ceiling low. Around you the walls bear the red ochre spirals and circles of ancient artisans painted 5,000 years ago, decorations that may have had more to do with rhythm and sound than just ornament. In one chamber, traditionally called the Oracle Room, something unusual happens. A man's voice uttered there can set the air vibrating at a pitch you feel more than hear. Experiments in modern times have found strong resonances at about 70 Hz and 110 to 114 Hz in that room. These frequencies lie in the low bass, nearly felt in the body, and may have shifted the state of mind of those who entered long ago. Now we move into the evidence ledger, list by list, find by find, documenting what archaeology and acoustics tell us about this place. First, the dating and architecture. The Hypogeum was in use roughly between 4000 BC and 2500 BC, during Malta's temple period. It covers about 500 square meters underground, carved over 3 levels, one on top of the other. The upper level lies just 1 or 2 meters below modern ground. The second and third levels descend deeper. This 3-tier structure suggests that over many generations the space was expanded and repurposed. Second, the structural features tied to acoustic experience. On the middle level, the so-called Oracle Room is a relatively small rectangular chamber, with smooth inward-sloping walls and a ceiling painted with spirals in red ochre. Acoustic studies detect that this room has high reverberation and defined peaks. One peer-reviewed measurement found a double resonance at 70 Hz and 114 Hz. With a male voice tuned to those frequencies or a percussion instrument, the sound waves fill not only that room but propagate into adjacent spaces. The geometry appears to have been fine-tuned. One study concluded that wall positions would have to shift only 10 to 25 centimeters to disrupt the resonance pattern. That degree of precision suggests intentional shaping of sound space rather than coincidence. Third, the ritual and burial context. The Hypogeum served as both a sanctuary and necropolis. Archaeologists found human remains, bones of more than 7,000 individuals by some estimates, alongside pottery, carved figures, beads, axes and ornaments. Some rooms show no human remains at all, suggesting they were reserved for ritual rather than burial. The integration of burial and ritual spaces supports the view that this was not simply a tomb but a place where the living, the dead and perhaps the divine might meet. Fourth, the sensory dimension. When you stand in the Oracle Room today, your voice returns to you in curious form. Workers report that a simple R takes on a low bass hum. The space seems to amplify and flatten sound in unnatural ways. The long reverberation time, over 4 seconds in some measurements, creates an echoing effect that dissolves the boundary between speaker and cave. This sensory dislocation may have been part of the experience. Visitors long ago may have entered in silence, then softly chanted, watched their voice fill the chamber, felt the stone respond. Some archaeologists suggest that the acoustic field itself acted like a tool for ritual transformation, to evoke other worlds, other states. Fifth, the question of intention and reinterpretation. While the acoustic data is compelling, scholars caution that not everything is solved. Some measurements confirm strong modes, others find that wall irregularities and rough surfaces damp the effect. It remains uncertain whether the builders explicitly designed the space for such resonance or if it is a fortunate byproduct of shape and rock. The accepted archaeological study states, The results confirm some, but not all, prior observations, and argue that a sound-based approach adds to archaeological understanding, but cannot alone settle meaning. Sixth, the physical finds that tie sound and ritual. Among the pottery and figurines found in the middle level is the so-called Sleeping Lady, a delicate clay figure lying prone, found in the main chamber adjacent to the oracle room. Around her were many carved items, beads, shell buttons, small amulets. These suggest ritual deposition, possibly in relation to altered states of consciousness or transition. The fact that nearby walls bear painted spirals and circular motifs, and the acoustic behaviour of the space itself, invites the idea that sound and symbol were intertwined. The walls may have been coated in pigments not only to visual impress, but to define texture and reflect sound in particular ways. Seventh, the preservation and modern experience. The Hippogeium is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, protected by stringent climate control and limited visitor numbers, only about 80 people per day allowed. Even today, scientists studying the site enter with sensors, microphones and sound generators. Their task? To map how voice, rhythm and resonance would have behaved 5 millennia ago. Their findings? Yes, something distinctive is going on, but yes, caution is needed. Rock geology, moisture, human interventions all shape the current acoustic state. In the end of this ledger of evidence, what stands clear is that the Hippogeium of Halsaflieni holds more than mere burial chambers. It holds a sensory architecture where stone and sound meet, where voice seems amplified into ritual and where the ancient builders may have sculpted not only space, but experience. Actun Tunikil Muknal, Belize. We enter the jungle of western Belize, through the dense green of the Cayo district, until the trail falls away and a dark mouth opens in limestone. This is the entrance to the cave called Cave of the Stone Sepulchre, used by the Maya. For the Maya, caves were more than holes in the rock. They were gateways into the underworld, the realm of gods and spirits known as Xibalba. The mouth of ATM stands as one of the most dramatic of these portal sites. From the Maya mythic view, caves like ATM were sacred thresholds. The story passed down in the Maya text known as the Popol Vuh describes the hero twins descending into Xibalba, enduring trials in underground halls, emerging transformed. Caves in the Maya world served as visible entrances into that other realm. At ATM, the evidence of ritual use is rich. These beliefs make the cave feel like a door to another world. Now let us turn to what modern archaeology tells us, what the data shows. First, the location and scale. ATM lies near San Ignacio in the Tapir Mountain Nature Reserve. The cave system stretches for a long passage of river water and dry chambers. Archaeologists believe its main ritual zone lies in the dry upper reaches of the cave. In the main chamber, specialists found skeletons, broken pottery, stone tools and ritual deposits. Second, the artifacts. In the dry zone of ATM, Maya ceramic vessels lie where they were left, often shattered or pierced with so-called kill holes, tiny holes punched in the pottery to release its spirit, according to Maya ritual custom. Human skeletal remains, calcified by mineral water, are scattered around. One complete skeleton, the Crystal Maiden, sparkles with calcite incrustation. These physical remains give weight to the idea that the cave was used for ritual offerings and possibly human sacrifice. Third, tied to mythic underworld imagery. The Maya associated this cave with the rain god Chark. Water flows through the cave, the climate inside evokes subterranean gloom and dripping rock. Many of the ritual pots contained maize, cacao and chili pepper, items tied to agricultural fertility. Archaeologists link the use of this cave to pleas for rain, fertility and survival, rituals conducted in a world beneath the Earth's surface, between life and death. Fourth, chronological and environmental context. Studies of the cave's deposits show that the majority of the offerings and human remains date to the period roughly between 750–900 CE. During that time, the Maya in the region experienced droughts. The oxygen isotope variations in stalactites and sediment cores confirm low rainfall periods. Scholars interpret the heightened ritual activity in ATM as a response to climate stress, a heightened plea into the underworld for relief. Fifth, raising the question, was ATM literally a door to another world or a ritual space symbolically linked to the underworld? The mythic language says door, passage, entry, the measurable data says cave system, offerings, ritual deaths, but also reuse, human activity and natural processes. The cave is real, the myth is real, the interpretation must navigate between them. Let's list specifics. 14 skeletal individuals have been discovered in the upper dry chamber, including children under 5. The calcified state of the remains indicates long-term deposition and mineral saturation. More than 200 ceramic vessels were found in situ, many with kill holes. The river flowing through the cave meant that parts of the ritual zone were accessible only by wading or swimming through water and climbing boulders, difficult access that would have reinforced liminality and separation from everyday life. Visitors today still wade and climb, but ancient pilgrims would have had torchlight and ritual focus. Another piece of the ledger, the geometry and structure of the cave reinforced the threshold experience. The path through the entrance tunnel is narrow, water-filled, low ceiling in places. Then you reach a vast cavern overhead of the main ritual zone. Light is minimal, sound echoes. Dripping water creates steady rhythm. The full sensory shift, jungle daylight, water wade, rock tunnel, silent chamber of bones and offerings, mimics a crossing into another realm. Yet the data also shows things less mystical. The cave continued to be used over centuries, was subject to flooding, the artifacts are mixed, and natural cave processes complicate interpretation. Some vessels break not because of ritual, but because of water damage. Skeletal remains might include non-sacrificial individuals. The cave's long use covers phases of Maya civilization, early classic, late classic, collapse phases. Its function may have shifted over time from fertility offerings to desperate ritual sacrality under drought stress. So when we speak of ATM as a door to another world, we anchor the claim in myth and ritual expectation. When we examine measured data, we see a cave with rituals, human remains, offerings, climatic stress, symbolic geography. The door is not literal in the sense of a constructed gate, but the cave functioned as a ritual threshold, designed in its use and its story to represent passage from the world of the living into the realm of the gods and the dead. Walking through ATM today, you pass a creek in darkness, climb a boulder, remove your shoes for the fragile floor, enter the chamber where human remains glisten under calcite and pottery lies undisturbed. The physical path mirrors the metaphorical journey into the underworld. The Maya view of the cave, their belief that they stood at the edge of Xibalba, gives the mythic frame. The archaeological evidence gives the structure. The gap between them is where the mystery remains. Artifacts broken intentionally, skeletons in situ, climate data pointing to drought rituals, all suggest that this cave was a major locus of symbolic crossing. Whether it was the door in the strict sense, or a powerful ritual space intentionally crafted to evoke that door, the effect is the same. The Maya conceived of it as connection, and the data supports a place of intense ritual and threshold. In the shadows of ATM, beneath dripping stalactites, the echoes of prayers for rain and fertility and life itself reverberate. The story of Xibalba is never far away when you sit still in that chamber and listen to your own breathing in the dark. Teotihuacan, Peru. High in the Andes, more than 3,000 meters above sea level, the ceremonial complex at Teotihuacan rises where two mountain rivers meet. You walk among stone plazas and stepped platforms, but beneath your feet is something more, a network of tunnels, galleries, and chambers designed to transform space, sound, and perception. The priests who built this place shaped both stone and silence to stage a meeting between earth and spirit. Start in the old temple, a U-shaped stone structure built around 900–200 BC. Its walls are filled with carved feline heads, serpents, and jaguar eagle figures. At the heart lies the famous monolith, the Lanzan, a 4.5 meters tall granite figure with fangs and serpent hair, standing in darkness at the end of a narrow subterranean gallery. Pilgrims followed a path from sunlit plazas down into shadow, descending into the very body of the mountain. The architecture is deliberately disorienting. Corridors become tunnels, galleries twist, ceilings lower, the stone changes texture. This is sacred space engineered to shift the senses. Now consider the acoustic and architectural interplay. Archaeologists and archaeoacousticians have shown that water channels, narrow conduits, and carved galleries work together to modulate sound, producing low-frequency hums and echoes. For example, built sluices once carried water beneath the floors and behind walls. The sound of flowing water would emerge in ritual chambers almost like a living presence. One research project found that the stone surfaces and gallery geometry at Teotihuacan created resonances in the range of 80 to 120 Hz, frequencies felt bodily rather than simply heard. These auditory effects amplified the sense of crossing into another realm. Walking the ritual route, you first stand in the sunken circular plaza, engineered with sunken walls and carefully placed stone benches. From there, you ascend a staircase into the main structure, yet beneath the facade the visitor enters the labyrinth of underground galleries. The architecture forces movement from open light to confined dark, from public spectacle to hidden chamber. In one gallery, the lanzon is concealed. Only priests could approach. The pilgrim hears the trickle of water, the echo of footsteps, the low moan of rock. Light filters in through narrow channels, then disappears. The stone itself becomes participant in the ritual. Let's list out the architectural and sensory evidence. First, layout. The old temple was constructed with multiple phases, layers of stone ramp and fill-hide older levels beneath newer. Corridors, ramps and galleries were carved deliberately. Underground, the lanzon gallery lies in the core of the temple. The monolith is oriented eastward, aligning with sunrise but subtly placed so that only in certain light conditions is its face revealed. That interplay of light and shadow was meaningful. Second, water and sound. Researchers mapped hidden sluices behind walls and beneath stone channels, built to convey water in ritual moments. One study concluded that priests used water drum-like effects and low-pitched shell trumpets, patutus, to generate sounds that resonated in the galleries. Third, sensory effect. The archaeologist John Rick described how pilgrims were guided into darkness, then subjected to sound effects of water behind walls and sudden appearance of the lanzon monolith in torchlight. The effect was dramatic. Light, sound, movement and stone combined to induce altered perception. Fourth, carved imagery. The tens of zoomorphic carvings and tenon heads projecting from walls show hybrid forms. Half human, half jaguar, half bird. These images reinforce the boundary between worlds. Fifth, dating and purpose. Carbon and stratigraphic analysis date the main ceremonial phase to 500, 200 BC, during which Chavin became a pilgrimage centre drawing people from coast and highlands. The priests who controlled access to the temple managed these experiences of descent and revelation. Through the stone and sound, the architecture becomes oracle. The lanzon monolith is more than sculpture. For pilgrims within the galleries, it may have felt alive. The acoustic field of the gallery amplified the low grumble of water channels and voices, making the stone seem to breathe. The shift from daylight into subterranean dark, the sudden echo, the sensation of heavy stone pressing above, all combine to create a threshold moment, entering not only a temple but another realm. Visitors may have heard a low hum, felt the walls vibrate, seen the monolith emerge from shadow, perceived the world differently. Yet the measured data also reminds us of the limits of interpretation. The acoustic studies show resonances, but the exact soundscapes of the original rituals remain speculative. The water channels are present, but the precise ritual sequence is not fully documented. Some corridors were clearly public, others restricted. We know the lanzon's orientation and context, but not the secrets of ancient rites performed there. The stone carvings are vivid, but their meaning remains debated. Were they shamanic transformation images, agricultural fertility icons, or socio-political symbols? The pilgrimage nature is well attested, yet exactly how individuals experienced the threshold remains partly hidden. Walking into the galleries today, we see the zigzag ramps, the shadows of tenon heads, the carved beasts on stone walls. We hear silence, broken only by the low drip of water, an occasional bird outside. If we speak in the lower galleries, we still feel the stone hum under our voices. The architecture invites us to pause, to feel the shift. Light becomes rare, space becomes confined. The stone presses in. The boundaries between human and divine, above and below, begin to blur. In that way, Teotihuacan becomes more than a site. It becomes a passage. The built environment, the carved stone, the sound of water, the hidden monolith, all are pieces of a crafted experience intended to move the pilgrim from world to beyond world. The oracle is not simply the monolith, but the whole sequence of descent, echo, reveal. We follow the stairs down, We enter the gallery where the Lansen stands. The walls around are carved with animals mid-transformation. The low hum of water channels behind the stone. A torch flickers on the face of the monolith. We feel the rock around us. We hear our own voice return oddly altered. The architecture has spoken. Pluto's gate at Hierapolis, Turkey. In the rolling terrain above the travertine terraces of Pamukkale, you reach the ancient city of Hierapolis, where the white calcium-rich springs cascade down the hillside. But down one narrow path, along the cliff's edge, lies a darker story, a shrine to the god of the underworld built where the air itself had the power to kill. This place was called the Plutonian, or Gate to Pluto, and its mythic weight has drawn scholars, pilgrims and tourists alike. The question we face is, how much of that myth turns out to rest on measurable reality? First, the mythic frame. Ancient geographer Strabo described the Plutonian as a small cave opening where birds placed into the opening would instantly die. He recorded that even spares of small size would breathe their last when dropped into the enclosure. Legend held that only the priests of the goddess Cybele, eunuchs known as the Galli, could approach safely, crawling on the floor or finding pockets of breathable air, thus proving divine protection. The sanctuary was seen as a doorway to the underworld itself, a crossing point between life and death. The myth draws on the notion that the earth exhales the breath of Hades and that the sacred hierarchy could engage with that threshold. Now, the measured data and excavation log. In the early 20th century, scholars knew of the ancient references, but the exact location was unclear. In the 1960s, Italian archaeologists began work at Hierapolis, identifying one cave near the Temple of Apollo as the Plutonian. In 2013, a team led by archaeologist Francesco D'Andrea from the University of Salento opened new excavations, deepening our understanding of the site. They mapped the cave, documented the architectural remains, and measured gas emissions within the chamber. The excavation log, March 2013 says a team clears travertine fill near a cavernous chamber. They uncover masonry walls forming a temple enclosure around the cave entrance. They note the stone paving in front of the cave mouth, marked off from the public area, perhaps used as a spectator zone. In subsequent weeks, they measure ground-level gas concentrations. They release birds near the entrance and record rapid asphyxiation. In one documented case, a bird brought near the opening collapsed within seconds. These observations mirrored Strabo's ancient report. Measured data reinforced the myth. Geologists and archaeologists found that the cave lies above a seismic fault and geothermal zone. Carbon dioxide, CO2, vents from the fissures accumulate at the cave floor and in the paved forecourt. Because CO2 is heavier than air, it pools in low zones, especially when the cave entrance remains closed or partly blocked. Modern sensors record elevated CO2 levels in the immediate area, enough to be lethal to small animals and dangerous to humans if exposed for longer periods. This provides a natural explanation for the fatal effect on birds and the aura of the gate to the underworld. The architectural evidence adds further weight. The enclosure around the cave shows cut stone walls forming a square paved area of about 2,000 square meters in front of the portal. Stairs descend into the cavity. The cave entrance is narrow and dark, lending a sense of liminality. The temple campus around includes reliefs of Pluto, Hades, and Cerberus, reinforcing the symbolic role of the space. The temple appears to date to the Hellenistic period, 2nd century BCE, and was used into Roman times. Archaeological data mark the primary cult use from the 1st century BCE into the 4th century CE. Turning to ritual practice, the paved forecourt was used to sell birds and animals to visitors who wished to test the deadly air. Sacrifices, offerings, and oracular pronouncements occurred here. The priests of Cybele may have crawled or held their breath to survive the fumes, or used raised platforms to keep their heads in cleaner air. The combination of natural toxic gas, architectural design, and ritual context created a powerful dramatic effect, a door to another world. Yet the measured data also pose questions and refine our understanding. While CO2 concentrations are high near the cave floor, the effect on humans would require specific conditions, standing low, staying long, being unprotected. Some scholars argue that the site's lethal aspect may have been partly theatrical. Priests may have used knowledge of when and where the gas pooled to stage the dying of animals. The exact timing of the cave's use as an oracle is debated. The rubble, travertine infill, and later Christian closure show complex phases of use and reuse. Recent studies note that the cave is only about 3 square metres in roofed area, behind which is a cleft. The paved forecourt may have been the real theatre for onlookers. Consider this evidence ledger. 1. Gas measurements show consistent CO2 pooling of hundreds to thousands of parts per million near floor level at the forecourt in early morning hours. 2. Architectural remains include a barrier fence, stairs descending into the cave, and a paved enclosure offering clear viewing access. 3. Inscriptions and reliefs referencing Pluto, Cerberus, and underworld imagery. 4. Historical sources, Strabo, Cassius Dio, describing birds thrown into the cave and priest entering unscathed. 5. Dating evidence, masonry and reliefs point to 2nd century BCE origin and subsequent Roman use. Later, Christian infill shows deliberate closure of site in 6th century CE. Walking the site today, you pass the paved enclosure, you peer into the dark fissure where thermal water still seeps and gases rise invisible. The benches and stone markers show where visitors once watched the spectacle. The stones beneath your feet may trap heavier air. The myth of the gate holds because nature, architecture and ritual combined in one place. In this blend of myth and measured data, the Plutonian stands at the threshold, not simply of an ancient city but of life and death, of human and divine. The birds died, the priests survived, the gas rose, the story persists. Osirion at Abydos, Egypt. Imagine descending into silence. The sunlit courts of a great temple fade behind you, and you enter rock-cut stairs that lead downward into the heart of the earth. Before you lies the Osirion, a subterranean hall, a platform surrounded by water, a symbolic island in the underworld. Here the Egyptian builders shaped stone, water and myth into architecture that reached into the realm of gods. The Osirion lies behind the mortuary temple of the pharaoh Seti in Abydos, and is widely regarded as a cenotaph dedicated to the god Osiris, or to Seti himself in his guise as Osiris. Ancient Egyptians believed that Osiris ruled over the Duat, the underworld, and that death and rebirth were central to his myth. The architecture of the Osirion seems deliberately crafted to evoke that myth. The floating island in water, the low ceiling, the massive monolithic pillars and the enclosing trench of water all suggest a descent into watery mystery, a symbolic emergence from death into new life. We begin the evidence ledger, item by item, find by find, building our understanding of how stone and water were woven into meaning. First, architecture and layout. The Osirion is built at a level far lower than the foundations of the Temple of Seti Vers. The central hall is characterized by a stone-paved island, seated in a sunken hall, surrounded on 3 sides by a channel of water of uncertain depth but at least 10 meters in some points. 10 or more massive monolithic pillars support the surviving roof beams in this hall. The architecture gives the impression of an island temple lying in a subterranean lake. Modern descriptions refer to it as an underground vaulted hall containing a central platform with 10 monolithic pillars surrounded by a channel of water. Second, symbolic orientation and mythic illusion. The island surrounded by water is a direct architectural metaphor for the primeval hill that emerged from the watery chaos in Egyptian creation myth. The water channel may stand for the primordial waters of Nun, the island for the place of emergence, and the pharaoh or the god Osiris standing on that island in eternal life. The low-ceiling vault and the buried nature of the hall reinforce the descent into the underworld, while the water suggests regeneration and renewal. Inside the hall, niches line the rock walls, perhaps for statues of Osiris or ancestors, and the whole complex lies beneath an artificial mound or hillock, itself a symbol of rebirth. Third, materials and construction techniques. The stone blocks are large. Granite beams and limestone sandstone walls show careful craftsmanship. The water channel was cut into the bedrock, and archaeologists note a connection with underground water sources. At times, the floor is flooded due to rising groundwater, suggesting the original water channel was fed by the Nile flood or subterranean springs. The presence of deeply cut trenches, waterproofing efforts, and the heavy stone roof indicate both ritual purpose and considerable engineering. Fourth, dating and inscriptions. While there is some debate, many Egyptologists assign the Osirion to the reign of Seti I, circa 1290–1279 BCE. Inscriptions found during excavation include the pharaoh's name alongside titles linking him to Osiris. The Egyptian Exploration Society's report of 1933 indicated that the cartouche of Seti First appears with epithets such as beneficial to Osiris in the hypogeal structure. Although part of the building may have been earlier or reused, the mainstream interpretation is that the Osirion was built as part of Seti's funerary complex. Fifth, functionality and ritual context. Scholars propose that the hall served as a symbolic tomb of Osiris, a place where the pharaoh identified with Osiris and where pilgrims or priests could enter the realm of death and renewal. The water in the island may have been used for agricultural symbolism. Experiments show that barley and wheat were grown in the water trenches at some point, representing the rebirth of vegetation and life. The deep location, the closed chamber, the water channel, all signal a sacred space outside ordinary life, a place for encounter with the divine. Sixth, preservation and anomalies. Today the Osirion is partially flooded due to risen groundwater levels. The roof has collapsed in parts, and visitors often view the hall from above because direct access is limited. Some architectural features remain mysterious. For example, the exact depth of the water channel is uncertain. Some scholars argue that the structure may be older than Seti I and later adapted. Others note that the island may have originally been covered by water entirely, making the visitor feel like floating in a subterranean sea of stone. The precise sequence of ritual use remains elusive. Seventh, sensory experience of stone and water. Standing on the paved island in the hall, one is surrounded by a low stone vault, water extending around you, pillars rising like trees in a swamp, light filtering from narrow openings. The sound of dripping water echoes in the vault. The air is damp and cool, the stone is smooth and heavy. The architecture seems to press in, yet the water channel provides a shimmering boundary, a moved edge between stone and liquid. The spatial effect is otherworldly. You're physically in Egypt, yet experientially beside the divine. Thus, the Osirion can be read as an architectural metaphor of cosmos. Earth, stone; water, primordial waters; sky, implied by the vaulted ceiling; and underworld, burial symbolism. The pharaoh stands at the centre on the island, bridging mortal and divine. The evidence, large-scale construction, deep water channel, architectural isolation and inscriptions, supports that reading. Here, within the evidence ledger, we see how myth and stone meet. The island platform in water, the vault beneath ground level, the monumental pillars, the carved names of Seti and Osiris. Each is a line entry, a ledger item that brings us closer to understanding. And yet the full story, how pilgrims felt the space, how rituals played out over generations, is partly lost. But the stone speaks still. Teotihuacan's underworld tunnel, Mexico. In the dry basin northeast of modern Mexico City, the ruins of Teotihuacan rise like stone mountains on the plain. For centuries, the city's Avenue of the Dead and its massive pyramids have hidden more than they revealed. But in 2003, something unexpected appeared. A storm opened a sinkhole at the foot of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. When archaeologist Sergio Gomez Chavez looked down, he saw darkness. Lowered by rope, he realized it wasn't a natural cavity. It was the top of a sealed tunnel carved by human hands almost 2,000 years ago. From that moment, the excavation began. Ground-penetrating radar mapped the tunnel stretching nearly 100 meters beneath the temple. It ran 15 meters below the surface and ended in 3 chambers. Over the following years, Gomez and his team cleared debris inch by inch. The air grew denser the deeper they went, the rock walls glistening with minerals. Every meter was documented, every fragment catalogued. Inside the tunnel, they found signs that it had been carefully sealed in antiquity, filled with stones and soil to close it forever. When workers finally reached the floor, they began uncovering offerings, fragments of pottery, obsidian blades, carved statues, and conch shells from the distant sea. Then came something stranger. Scattered along the floor were hundreds of small spheres coated in pyrite that once shimmered like gold. The walls glittered with metallic dust made of magnetite and hematite. When lit by torches, the corridor sparkled as if filled with stars. The most surprising find came at the far end. In the deepest chamber, researchers discovered thin pools of silvery liquid. Chemical analysis confirmed what few expected. It was mercury. The metal was still there after all these centuries, shimmering under flashlight beams. In Mesoamerican thought, liquid mercury was not an industrial material. It symbolized the underworld's rivers and the reflective surface of sacred water. Within the darkness of the tunnel, it may have represented the boundary between life and death. This is the excavation log of a place that mirrors myth. In ancient belief, Teotihuacan was a site of cosmic origin, the place where the gods created the sun and the moon. Myths across Mesoamerica speak of a subterranean realm beneath the earth, a watery underworld where creation began and where souls journeyed after death. The tunnel beneath the temple of the feathered serpent seems to have been built as a physical reflection of that realm. Measurements show that the tunnel descends slightly toward its final chambers, reinforcing the sense of entering the depths. The entire structure was carved directly into volcanic rock, its walls plastered and painted in places. Archaeologists estimate that construction began around the 1st century and that it was sealed about 200 years later. The chambers at the end contained thousands of ritual items: jaguar bones, carved jade figures, crystal fragments, rubber balls, even seeds and flowers preserved by mineral salts. Each seems to have been placed intentionally, forming a ritual landscape beneath the pyramid. The combination of light, sound, and material would have created a powerful effect. In torchlight, the metallic powders on the walls would glitter like a night sky. The pools of mercury would reflect the flickering flames and the moving figures of priests. The pyrite spheres scattered on the floor might have rattled softly when disturbed, adding a faint metallic chime. Everything in this space was designed to blur the line between architecture and vision, between the human world and the cosmic underworld. The scientific data confirms the extraordinary nature of the site. Mercury levels remain high. Gas sensors detect its slow evaporation even now. Samples show the metal was probably imported from Cinnabar or mined hundreds of kilometers away. The labor to refine it and transport it suggests a deliberate act of devotion. Isotopic analysis of the bones shows they belong to animals associated with power and transformation: jaguar, wolf, eagle, snake. The offerings combine air, water, earth, and fire in physical form. Yet the archaeological evidence also keeps the mystery grounded. There are no written inscriptions explaining the rituals or naming the deities involved. The exact function of the tunnel remains uncertain. Some believe it was a symbolic journey taken by priests to communicate with divine forces. Others suggest it may have been a preparation chamber for royal burials, though no tomb has been found. What is certain is that the tunnel was sealed while the city above was still thriving, suggesting the act of closure itself carried meaning. Standing inside today, you feel the weight of the mountain above you. The ceiling presses low, the air cool and still. Tiny flecks of mineral light catch the beam of a headlamp. At your feet, the path narrows toward the chamber where the mercury once shimmered like a river in darkness. Every sound echoes in slow rhythm, as if the tunnel itself breathes. It is a place of deliberate illusion, built to make humans feel the depth of the unseen world. The myth tells of a passage to the underworld. The excavation gives us rock, mercury, pyrite, and bone. Between the two lies a vision that is neither wholly science nor wholly legend. A tunnel beneath a sacred pyramid sealed for 2 millennia that turned the earth itself into a mirror of the cosmos. Newgrange, Ireland. Dawn breaks over the Boyne Valley in County Meath. The grass-covered mound of Newgrange stands quietly on a gentle rise, the winter air crisp, the horizon pale. As you approach, you sense something ancient, built not only to hold the dead, but to hold the sky. This is a place where stone and light were woven together into the rhythm of the year. Newgrange was built around 3200 BCE by Neolithic farmers, long before the Great Pyramids of Egypt. The mound is 85 meters wide, about 12 meters high, and covers roughly an acre of ground. A massive project. The builders moved stone, earth, quartz, and cobbles across the landscape and shaped them into this monumental tomb and ritual center. Inside the mound, a 19-meter passage leads into a cruciform chamber at its heart. The walls are made of upright slabs of stone. Corbelled roof slabs form the ceiling, all without mortar. The precision and scale alone speak of a society deeply invested in meaning. Turn your attention to the entrance facade. The white quartz cobbles on the front shimmer in morning light. Dark rounded stones from distant hills form the curbstone ring around the mound. The facades of Newgrange were designed to shine, to catch light and to announce their presence. But the deepest gesture is the roof box over the entrance. A small rectangular opening set above the doorway, aligned so that at the winter solstice the first rays of the rising sun enter the passage and reach the inner chamber. For about 17 minutes at dawn, the chamber glows from within. This beam of light penetrates the darkness of stone. Think of the cosmos in stone: earth, sky, time. The builders carved a mound into the landscape, matter that represents earth and mortality, but they opened that mound to the sky, to the turning sun, to the cycle of seasons. At midsummer the days shorten, at midwinter they lengthen. Newgrange marks that turning point. The sunlight that slips into the passage is a visual poem. Darkness recedes, hope returns, renewal begins. In this act, stone becomes calendar, architecture becomes cosmos. Now examine the material evidence. First, the passage and chamber. The passage is oriented roughly east-southeast, and the roof box aligns the sun's rays so that on winter solstice the light travels the full length of the passage and strikes the back of the central chamber. Studies show that when Michael O'Kelly observed the event in December 1967, the beam reached the back wall. Over millennia the alignment shifts slightly, but effect remains. Second, the art. Many of the curbstones and passage orthostats are decorated with spirals, lozenges, chevrons, and other motifs. The most famous is a curbstone at the front bearing a triple spiral motif. These carvings may speak of cycles, sun, life, death, rebirth. Third, the construction materials. White quartz stones for the facade came from perhaps 50 kilometres away. Rounded cobbles brought from even further, the internal orthostats from local greywacke. The labour and logistics reflect large-scale coordination and symbolic commitment. Fourth, ritual deposits. Excavations revealed both burnt and unburnt human bones, pottery, beads, and tools. The inner chamber held traces of cremation and deposit of remains, suggesting funerary as well as ceremonial function. Fifth, renewal symbolism. The annual solstice illumination itself acts as a ritual moment, the return of light, the victory of day over night, the promise of spring. It stands as proof that the builders of Newgrange oriented their lives around cosmic time. Walking into the mound today, you descend through the darkness of the corridor. You feel the chill of the stone, the narrowing walls, the low rise of the ceiling. As you enter the chamber, you step into the stillness of time. When the faint beam of light reaches you, you sense the intent of those long gone, to draw sun, stone, and people into one moment. The mound is solid, heavy, but it lets in a shaft of light. The structure becomes transformer, from dark to light, from death to renewal. The relationship between stone and sky is central. The earth tilt, the sun's arc, the winter solstice. They were all observed by the builders. Light becomes a visitor inside the tomb. They created a waiting place for it, and that waiting place is Newgrange. The passage tomb stands not simply as a marker of the dead, but as a monument to cycles, cosmic, agricultural, human. The sun's arrival is not just light, it is meaning cast in stone. Through the evidence ledger we see the layered story. The mound built 5,000 years ago, the aligned passage, the roof box aperture, the decorated stones, the human remains and offerings, the quartz facade shining in the dawn. Each piece of stone, each carved spiral, each ray of light is a line in the ledger of cosmos in stone. At Newgrange, the boundary between human and sky, between below and above, becomes porous. The stone holds the memory, the light brings it alive. In standing at the threshold, you are part of a cycle older than the house you live in, older than kingdoms. The sun enters, the past responds, the mound receives. You, in that moment, join the silent procession of thousands of years. Maeshowe, Orkney, Scotland. The wind never stops in Orkney. It moves across the low green fields, rattles the heather, and rolls in from the cold North Atlantic with a sound that seems older than language. On a gentle rise, surrounded by a ring of stones and distant hills, sits a mound of earth and stone called Maeshowe. From the outside it looks simple, just another grassy hill. But inside, hidden behind a narrow stone passage, is one of the most extraordinary architectural conversations between light, stone and voice that Northern Europe has ever known. Maeshowe was built around 2800 BCE, during the Neolithic period, making it older than Stonehenge and the pyramids of Egypt. The structure belongs to a chain of passage tombs scattered across the Orkney landscape, but it is exceptional for both its precision and its endurance. The entrance passage stretches more than 10 metres, aligned perfectly so that at sunset on the winter solstice, sunlight enters the doorway, travels the entire corridor, and strikes the back wall of the inner chamber. For only a few days each year, light from the dying sun reaches the heart of the tomb. When you crawl through the entrance today, you feel the chill of the stone, the air heavy with moisture. The passage is low, you have to stoop or crawl. Then suddenly you emerge into a square chamber built with corbelled stone walls, the ceiling rising above you like an inverted pyramid. 4 side cells open from the central space. The craftsmanship is remarkable. Massive slabs fitted without mortar, still watertight after 5,000 years. The alignment with the midwinter sun is so exact that researchers believe the builders observed the solar cycle for years before construction began. The structure acts like a calendar, but not just for tracking seasons. The light entering the tomb at the darkest time of the year marks renewal, the promise of return. In ancient northern societies, the sun's reappearance after the long darkness was a moment of awe and relief. At Maeshowe, architecture became a tool for anticipation. When the first golden beam pierced the passage, it illuminated the space where ancestors were remembered, creating a moment of connection between the living world and what lay beyond. The architectural precision is matched by a kind of acoustical intimacy. The corbelled walls and the long stone corridor shape sound in curious ways. A single voice, even whispered, carries clearly through the passage. The design amplifies resonance while dampening echo, producing a focused, almost sacred sound field. Archaeologists studying other Orkney tombs found similar properties. The chambers seem to respond to low-frequency chanting. The structure, like an oracle, seems to listen and answer. And then there are the witnesses, the marks left by later visitors. Around the 12th century, Viking settlers broke into Maeshowe, probably seeking shelter during a storm or perhaps searching for treasure. They left behind one of the largest collections of runic inscriptions ever found in a single location. More than 30 individual carvings cover the walls, turning the Neolithic chamber into a medieval message board. Some are simple statements. Hermund was here. Others are teasing or boastful. Ingebjorg, the fair widow. Many a woman has walked stooping here. A few hint at lost stories. These runes were carved by the man most skilled in runes in the West. These inscriptions add another layer of meaning. For the Norse, Maeshowe was already ancient. They called it Orkauga, the mound of the orcs. To them, it was a place of power, a dwelling of the dead, a remnant of giants or gods. Their graffiti, crude human alive, collides with the quiet geometry of the tomb, creating a dialogue between two civilizations separated by nearly 3,000 years. The Neolithic builders shaped it to mark the sun. The Vikings used it to mark their presence. 2 kinds of voices now live in the stone. Archaeological evidence helps trace the phases of its use. Excavations show that the chamber once contained human remains and grave goods, later removed or destroyed. The surrounding ditch and mound form part of a larger ceremonial landscape that includes the standing stones of Stennes and the Ring of Brodgar, visible from the site. Radiocarbon dating places Maeshowe within the same cultural horizon as those monuments, suggesting a shared ritual system. The builders must have carried stones weighing several tons from nearby quarries, shaped them with stone tools, and aligned them with celestial events. The engineering is as impressive as the symbolism. The corbelled roof rises in layers, each slab slightly overhanging the one below, culminating in a single capstone that seals the chamber. This technique distributes weight evenly, keeping the structure stable for millennia. The mound covering the tomb, nearly 35 meters in diameter, insulates it from wind and rain. Inside, temperature and humidity remain almost constant year-round. The builders were not only astronomers, but engineers of remarkable skill. Each winter at the solstice, the same ritual moment repeats. The beam of sunlight travels through the narrow passage, growing brighter as it approaches the center. It touches the back wall, lingers, and fades. For a few minutes, the tomb comes alive with light. Then darkness closes in again, waiting for another year. Scientists have calculated that the alignment would have shifted only slightly over 5,000 years, meaning what happens today is nearly identical to what the builders witnessed. The runes, the stone, the alignment, they form a patchwork of voices across time. You can imagine the Neolithic priest watching for the sun, chanting in the half-light, and the Norse traveller carving his name centuries later, hearing his own echo in the same space. The mound becomes both instrument and witness. It listens, it records, it holds the memory of hands, words, and light. Standing inside Maeshowe, you feel the weight of those layers. The air smells of earth and salt. The silence is almost physical. When the wind outside roars across the plain, the sound is muffled, distant, as if the tomb exists outside of time. And when the sun's ray finally pierces the entrance, striking the far wall, the chamber fills with gold. The same moment has repeated for thousands of winters, each one carrying another breath of human wonder into the stone. Grotto of Pan at Banias, Caesarea Philippi, Israel. A low cliff face rises beside a mountain spring, water shimmering in emerald light as it spills over travertine terraces. Here at Banias, anciently called Caesarea Philippi, the spring flows from the mouth of a cave. For the Greeks and Romans, this cave was sacred to Pan, the half-goat deity of wild places. In the classical sources, it became known as the Gates of Hades, a portal to the underworld. We begin with the witness patchwork, myths, texts, and archaeological signs. The geographer Strabo recorded that the cave near Paneas was thought to lead to the realm of the dead, that animals thrown into it disappeared. Later, Christian writers pointed to the place when speaking of the gates of hell as mentioned in the Gospels. Archaeological work in the 20th century uncovered remains of temples and shrines dedicated to Pan, Zeus, Augustus, and the nymphs clustered around the spring and cave complex. The location of the cave, the flowing water, the cultic build-up all point to a long-standing sense of threshold, life above ground, another world beneath. Now we shift to measured data and examine how close the myth and the material meet. First, the spring and cave geology. The Banias spring emerges from a limestone cliff at the foot of Mount Hermon. The cave mouth is partly collapsed, but the water gushes out with force. The ancient texts described it as bottomless. Modern echo soundings and hydrography show the water flows deeply into the rock, though no completely open abyss has been confirmed. Second, the cultic remains. Archaeologists found the terrace of temples, the remains of a temple of Pan and other deities, carved niches in the rock face, altars and votive deposits. The temple complex dates from the Hellenistic period onward. Third, the mythic dimension in cult practice. At Banias, the sacrifice of goats and perhaps other offerings linked to fertility and water was central. The natural setting of spring plus cave plus cliff reinforced a vision of descent and renewal. Fourth, the question of gate status. While the myth declares a doorway into the underworld, the structural and geological evidence suggest a cave spring complex with strong symbolic weight, but not a literal ladder into Hades. The door is metaphorical though anchored in geography. Let's list the evidence ledger in more detail. 1. Temple remains, inscriptions and architectural fragments indicate a shrine to Pan Heliopolitanus. Niches carved into cliffs suggest statues once stood there. 2. Cultic pathway, the ancient city of Caesarea Philippi, renamed under Philip the Tetrarch, incorporated the grotto into its sacred precinct, indicating civic acceptance of the threshold symbolism. 3. Spring hydrology. The Banias spring is one of the major sources of the Jordan River. Its volume and clarity contributed to its sacred status. 4. Cave access and experience. The cave mouth is dark, damp, and partially submerged. Visitors historically might have approached it by walking along the terrace and then entering or touching the spring water. 5. Mythical texts. Classical authors link the site to Pan and to Hades, and later Christian interpreters link the gates of Hades in scripture to this very locale. 6. Modern geologic reading. While carbon dioxide or toxic gases aren't the major feature here, unlike some other gate caves, the depth of spring water, the force of discharge, and the hidden cavity contribute to a sense of liminality. 7. Ritual remains. Animal bones and pottery shards found in the vicinity suggest cultic practices. Though direct evidence of human sacrifices disappearing into the cave is thin, the combination of myth and setting encourage belief. So the structure stands. The myth says this cave is a door to another world. The measured data says this cave is a powerful sacred site of water, stone and ritual, but perhaps not literally a passage to the dead. In the rituals at Banias, worshippers entered a space where water emerged from rock, where the living met the subterranean stream, where the gods of wilds and springs dwelled. That is gate language, even if not a literal shaft to Hades. Walking the site today, you approach the spring and its terrace. You see the rock face, the niches, the water rushing out. The cave mouth is dark, the air cool, damp. If you peer inside, you may glimpse the water vanishing into shadow. You sense the meeting of realms, not only rock and stream, but earth and under-earth, life and death, human and divine. The temple remains, the pilgrim path, the ancient inscriptions, each speaks of a place where people crossed thresholds of meaning. In this way, the Grotto of Pan at Banias becomes a case study in how myth and archaeology intersect. The Gates of Hades label captures the ancient mind's way of naming powerful locations. The measured evidence may not confirm a literal door, but shows how ancient builders and worshippers shaped space and experience, so that the boundary between worlds felt real. At this cave spring, the water does not simply flow, it emerges from the cliff, passing through hidden rock, whispering the presence of depths. And that whisper is enough for myth to grow into belief, and for pilgrims to stand at the edge of another world. Cave of the Sibyl at Cumae, Italy. At the edge of the ancient Greek colony of Cumae, near the Bay of Naples, lies a hill of volcanic tuff pierced by a narrow man-made passage. The air is cool, the light dim, the walls cut with long slanting planes of stone. It is a corridor that seems to lead into the heart of the earth. This is the so-called Cave of the Sibyl, the oracle described by Virgil in the Aeneid, a place where mortals came to ask questions of the gods and to receive words that shaped the fate of empires. The story of this cave is told through the voices of witnesses scattered across time. The earliest comes from the Greek historian Heraclides, who wrote that Cumae was home to a prophetess who lived in a rocky chamber. Later, the Roman poet Virgil immortalized her as the Cumaean Sibyl, the priestess who guided Aeneas into the underworld. Her voice, he wrote, was carried on the breath of Apollo himself, speaking in riddles from the darkness of her cave. When Roman generals or kings sought guidance, they came here to the Sibyl's seat, to listen for the sound of destiny. By the Middle Ages, the exact location of her cave was forgotten. Pilgrims still visited ruins on the Acropolis, but the oracle's passage was considered legend. Then, in 1932, the Italian archaeologist Amedeo Maiuri began excavations near the ancient Acropolis of Cumae. His team uncovered a long rock-cut corridor running deep into the hillside, with a trapezoidal section and a sequence of side chambers. The passage measured about 130 meters in length, aligned roughly northwest to southeast, and descended gradually toward a vaulted chamber at its end. Maiuri believed he had found the fabled sanctuary of the Sibyl. We now enter the evidence ledger. First entry, the architecture itself. The main gallery is cut entirely into the yellow tuff of the hill, the walls sloping slightly inward toward the ceiling, forming a sharp trapezoid. The corridor is lit by a row of small square openings on the southern wall, allowing shafts of sunlight to fall into the passage during the day. These openings create a play of light and darkness that guides visitors step by step into deeper shadow. Along the corridor, a series of side niches open off to the right, some leading into small chambers. At the far end lies a larger room with a bench-like platform and recesses in the walls, possibly the oracle's seat. Second entry, dating and context. The tunnel was cut sometime between the late 6th and early 5th century BCE, during the Greek occupation of Cumae. The work shows advanced engineering skill typical of Greek defensive galleries and sanctuaries in soft, tough rock. Later, in Roman times, parts of the complex may have been reused or modified, but the overall layout appears archaic. Maiuri argued that the Sibyl's oracle operated here before being transferred to Delphi's model under Roman influence. Third entry, ritual interpretation. The trapezoidal corridor and the gradual descent may have been designed to stage a ritual experience. Visitors entering from the bright Mediterranean light would pass through alternating zones of shadow until reaching the dark inner chamber, where the Sibyl, according to legend, delivered her prophecies. The small windows allowed for controlled illumination, enough to see but never enough to dispel mystery. Some scholars suggest that the priestess might have remained hidden from view, her voice echoing through the corridor, amplified by the hard stone surfaces. Fourth entry, corroborating finds. In the nearby sanctuary area, excavations revealed fragments of pottery, votive figurines, and Greek inscriptions referring to oracular dedications. A stone base found near the entrance may have supported a tripod similar to those associated with Apollonian cults. Coins and lamps from later Roman layers suggest continued veneration of the site, even after the official oracle had ceased. The remains of fortifications nearby indicate that the Acropolis served both religious and defensive purposes. Fifth entry, the question of identification. Not all scholars agree that Maeshowe's discovery is the actual cave described by Virgil. Some point out that the literary description refers to 100 doors and 100 voices, an exaggeration or metaphor that does not match the single long corridor of Cumae. Others argue that the oracle might have been located elsewhere within the Acropolis, or even within an underground area now collapsed. Yet the combination of architectural uniqueness, geographical position, and ancient testimony continues to support Maeshowe's interpretation. Sixth entry, sensory experience. Inside the corridor, sound behaves strangely. The walls catch and carry it. A whisper near the entrance can be heard deep inside. Wind from the hillside sometimes passes through the slits, producing low murmurs that change pitch as the day warms. Visitors report that the light from the side openings shifts in colour and angle, marking the passage of time. The acoustics and light together create an atmosphere perfectly suited to ritual voice and mystery. Seventh entry, landscape and symbolism. The cave opens toward the plain that faces Lake Avernus, itself considered an entrance to the underworld in Roman myth. The proximity of these two gates, the volcanic lake and the Sibyl's passage, links them in both geography and imagination. Ancient travellers approaching by sea would have seen the dark volcanic cliffs, the steam rising from fumaroles, and the fortified hill of Cumae above them. The entire area was a theatre of thresholds, between sea and land, between life and death, between mortal speech and divine response. Each witness, each measurement, each fragment of carved tuff adds to the patchwork. There is the poet's voice describing a woman possessed by Apollo. There is the archaeologist's voice marking dimensions, slopes and cuts in the stone. There are the voices of travellers, soldiers, pilgrims and tourists who have stood in that corridor and felt the past pressing in. Whether or not this is the exact chamber of the Sibyl, the experience matches the myth, a descent from light to shadow, from silence to echo, from question to voice. Inside, the air remains constant, cool and still, the smell of dust and stone lingers. Through the narrow windows, thin rays of daylight strike the floor like bars. You walk forward, the light fading behind you, until the walls seem to close in. Then, in the dimness of the last chamber, you imagine the sound of breath, the echo of words in a language older than Rome. The Sibyl's cave remains, a corridor of stone, a vessel for voices, a bridge between what is spoken and what is remembered. Derinkuyu, Cappadocia, Turkey. In central Anatolia, the landscape of Cappadocia seemed like something shaped by dream and erosion together. Cones of soft volcanic rock rise from the plain, riddled with openings, doorways, windows and tunnels that disappear into the earth. Beneath one of these towns lies a hidden world carved by human hands, Derinkuyu, the deepest of Cappadocia's underground cities. It is not myth but solid stone, an entire network that plunges more than 80 meters down, layered with living quarters, chapels, storerooms, stables and wells. We begin from above ground, in what feels like a normal Anatolian town. Streets cross between stone houses, a mosque stands at the centre, and grapevines climb over walls. But under the floors of homes, secret trapdoors open to stairways descending into darkness. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, the map of the underground world unfolds, narrow corridors twisting into chambers, ventilation shafts dropping through the levels, rolling stone doors designed to seal each passage. What appears chaotic is in fact an organised plan, a city built downward instead of upward. The architecture tells its own story. Archaeological studies show that the earliest levels were probably begun by the Phrygians around the 8th or 7th century BCE, carving into the soft tough rock left by ancient volcanic eruptions. Later, during the Byzantine period, Christians expanded and deepened the network to create safe havens from invasions. By the time of its full development, Derinkuyu could accommodate an estimated 20,000 people and their animals. It connected to other underground settlements through long tunnels stretching for kilometres. Walking through it feels like moving through an inverted mountain. On the upper floors lie kitchens and living quarters, Lower down, wine presses, granaries and stables. Still deeper, chapels, schools and communal rooms. One of the lowest levels even contains a missionary school with vaulted ceilings and a cross-shaped chapel. Air shafts over 50 centimetres wide descend from the surface, ensuring constant airflow to every level. Wells provide fresh water separate from surface contamination. The rock, though soft enough to carve, is stable enough to hold its form for centuries. The builders understood their material intimately, turning geology into architecture. Each floor functions like a self-contained unit. Stone discs up to 1.5 metres in diameter could be rolled across corridor entrances, sealing off sections in case of attack. Small holes in the centres of these doors allowed defenders to spear intruders without opening them. Hidden chimneys vented smoke, and narrow corridors slowed the movement of outsiders unfamiliar with the layout. Archaeologists have identified 8 accessible floors, though more may exist below those still unexcavated. The total depth exceeds 85 metres, making Derinkuyu the deepest known underground settlement in the region. In the map-room sense, the site reads like a vertical atlas of adaptation. Each passage and chamber marks human response to fear, survival, and ingenuity. On maps drawn by survey teams, Derinkuyu spreads downward like a branching root system, each chamber labelled with its function: living area, stable, store, well, pressing room, chapel. The network connects horizontally to neighbouring underground cities such as Kaimakli through tunnels that may extend several kilometres, suggesting a cooperative defence network across the Cappadocian Plateau. Now move into the lived experience, the oracle and architecture of daily life below. Inside the underground city, sound carries softly along the stone corridors. People would have lived by the rhythm of oil lamps and echoing voices. Bread was baked in clay ovens whose smoke escaped through cleverly disguised vents. Water dripped slowly from wells fed by underground aquifers. Livestock were kept on the upper levels to reduce odour and to provide heat. Families lived in small rooms carved with benches, shelves and niches for storage. The stone preserved a constant temperature of about 13 degrees Celsius year-round. Cool in summer, warm in winter. The community below was not only defensive but social and spiritual. Archaeologists found spaces interpreted as churches and monasteries, with carved crosses and apses still visible. The largest chamber, about 20 by 9 metres, is thought to have served as a meeting or worship hall. Its acoustics amplify low voices, filling the space evenly without echo, perhaps an unintended but remarkable effect of the geometry. The presence of wine presses and communal kitchens shows that life here was sustained, not temporary. For weeks or months, entire populations could remain underground during raids or harsh winters. The design also reflects a practical intelligence tied to faith. The Byzantines who expanded Derinkuyu saw the underground as both refuge and metaphor, a shelter from earthly danger and a mirror of spiritual endurance. The act of descending carried symbolic weight. To go below was to seek safety and purification. To emerge was to be renewed. In this way, the architecture becomes a lived oracle of human resilience, translating survival into spatial language. From a technical view, the excavation is astonishing. Engineers of the General Directorate of Antiquities have documented more than 600 exterior openings to air shafts. Each connects to multiple floors, maintaining oxygen levels even when the city is sealed. Stone doors roll with precision across grooves worn smooth by centuries of use. The carved channels for water and waste show planning beyond improvisation. The walls bear chisel marks that match iron tools used in later phases, suggesting continuous modification. Standing in one of the deeper chambers, the sense of space is disorienting. The ceiling curves low, the light fades into a dull glow, and footsteps on the pumice dust sound muffled. When you look up through one of the shafts, you see only a thin circle of daylight, impossibly far above. It feels like standing inside the memory of the earth itself. Derinkuyu still functions as a kind of silent city. Visitors descend floor by floor, tracing the same routes people once used to survive. The map remains unfinished. Archaeologists believe only a fraction has been fully explored. Every tunnel seems to lead to another corridor, another stairway, another possibility hidden beneath the volcanic rock. It is not just a monument. It is an entire world turned inward, a city carved from fear and faith, where life once moved quietly under the weight of stone and history. Chichen Itza's sacred cenote, Mexico. In the forests of the Yucatan Peninsula, the air feels heavy and the ground hides secrets beneath limestone. The ancient Maya city of Chichen Itza rises from this landscape, stone pyramids surrounded by dense vegetation and sinkholes that open suddenly in the earth. These natural wells, called cenotes, were more than sources of water. They were gateways to the divine. Among them, one stands apart, the sacred cenote, a vast circular pit of green water where countless offerings and human lives were given to the gods. Approaching the sacred cenote, you hear only the wind in the ceiba trees and the call of birds. The ground suddenly drops into a cylindrical hole about 60 meters across and 20 meters deep. The limestone walls are smooth and steep, streaked with minerals. At the bottom lies a pool of still water, its color shifting from jade to black depending on the light. This is the place the Maya called Cenote Sagrado, the Well of Sacrifice. It connects to the underworld, or Xibalba, through the waters that run below the city. The first voice in the witness record comes from the Spanish chroniclers. Diego de Landa wrote in the 16th century that the people of Chichen Itza threw men, women and treasures into the cenote to ask for rain and favour from the gods. For centuries this description was treated as legend. Then, at the beginning of the 20th century, the American archaeologist Edward Herbert Thompson purchased the land containing the cenote and began to dredge its depths. Between 1904 and 1911, divers and workers pulled up gold discs, jade beads, obsidian knives, copper bells, carved bones, textiles, and the remains of men and women who had been offered to the gods. We begin the evidence ledger. Item 1, the structure itself. The sacred cenote is a natural sinkhole formed by the collapse of limestone above an underground river. The Maya city was built between this cenote and another, the cenote Ixtoloc, which provided fresh water. The sacred cenote, by contrast, was reserved for ceremony. Its near-perfect circle and vertical walls gave it an otherworldly appearance. Item 2, the archaeological record. Thompson's early excavations retrieved over 30,000 objects, many showing evidence of intentional damage before deposition, what archaeologists call ritual killing. Later studies by the Mexican Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia confirmed the variety of materials. Gold ornaments, jade from Guatemala, turquoise from the American Southwest, copper from distant regions, all pointing to far-reaching trade and symbolic value. Item 3. Human remains. Early accounts focused on male victims, but later, dives identified women and children as well. Forensic analysis revealed trauma on some skulls consistent with execution or sacrifice. Radiocarbon dating shows that the offerings span several centuries, especially from the late Classic to post-Classic periods, roughly between 700 and 1200 CE. Item 4. Environmental context. The cenote's water chemistry, rich in minerals, has preserved many artifacts. The lower layer of sediment reveals alternating periods of deposition, intense phases of offerings followed by centuries of calm. This pattern suggests that ritual use increased during times of drought or crisis, when communication with the gods of rain and fertility, particularly Chak, became urgent. Item 5. Acoustic and visual properties. Standing at the rim, one notices that sound behaves differently here. Voices echo off the curved limestone walls and linger above the water. The vertical drop amplifies this effect, turning every call into an invocation. The water's surface, often shrouded in mist, mirrors the sky. For the Maya, these qualities made the cenote an ideal meeting point between the human world and the gods below. Now shift to the gate myth and measured data. In the Maya worldview, water caves and sinkholes were portals to Xibalba, the underworld where deities of death, rain, and fertility dwelled. Offerings were not mere gifts, but messages sent through water to unseen powers. The myth describes souls descending through watery paths to reach the gods, and the cenote provided the physical stage for that descent. Modern science, however, shows a geological explanation, a karst system of underground rivers connecting the cenotes of the Yucatan. The passage exists, but as part of natural hydrology rather than supernatural geography. Still, the measured data do not erase belief, they reveal its precision. Chemical studies of sediments found organic traces suggesting fires and resins, meaning rituals involving incense were performed at the rim. Wooden stairways or platforms once jutted out over the water, Remnants of posts and carvings were found during underwater surveys. The cenote's edge was a stage for offerings that bridged the surface and the depths. Further entries in the ledger include the connection to the Temple of Kukulkan, the Great Pyramid only a few hundred meters away. Archaeologists discovered that both structures are aligned along a north-south axis, linking the pyramid's ritual center to the sacred well. This axis may have marked the spiritual journey from the heavens, represented by the pyramid, to the underworld, represented by the cenote. Underwater exploration in the 1960s and 1990s using scuba and sonar mapping confirmed that the cenote's base is uneven, with pockets filled with silt and organic debris. Divers reported currents moving slowly towards subterranean channels. These findings match the idea that the cenote forms part of a vast system of underground waterways extending toward the Caribbean coast. The Maya, observing the water's motion, may have imagined it as the literal flow between worlds. When you stand at the edge of the sacred cenote today, you see the same still surface that priests once faced. The air is humid, heavy with the smell of vegetation. The water below seems calm, but its colour hides depth and motion. Each gust of wind ripples the surface, breaking the reflection of the sky. The limestone walls are streaked with green algae where centuries of rain have washed over them. You can almost picture torches flickering at night, the rhythmic sound of drums, the splash of an offering cast into the water. The evidence remains visible: carved stone fragments, recovered ornaments, the geological truth of a sinkhole opening into an underground river. The myth persists as well, a door through which prayers, gifts, and souls might pass. Between the two lies the enduring vision of the Maya, a world where water is not only life but passage, where the surface of a cenote is both mirror and threshold. Balamku Cave, Chichen Itza. In 2019, deep beneath the ancient city of Chichen Itza, archaeologists crawled through a narrow, twisting tunnel that had been sealed for more than 1,000 years. The air was thick, the rock pressing close on every side. They were following a small passage that opened into a hidden chamber, then another and another, each filled with untouched offerings left by the ancient Maya. The site was Balamku, Cave of the Jaguar God, a subterranean world that had been closed off since the Classic period. What the team found inside was not treasure in the usual sense, but a perfectly preserved time capsule of belief. The excavation log begins with discovery. In 1959, a farmer exploring the hills near Chichen Itza accidentally stumbled upon the entrance to the cave. Archaeologist Victor Segovia Pinto documented it briefly, noting pottery and offerings, but soon ordered the cave to be sealed again, perhaps fearing contamination or collapse. The site remained forgotten until March 2018, when members of Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, INAH, were conducting a mapping project of underground passages. During their survey, they rediscovered the sealed entrance. When the team led by Guillermo de Anda reopened the passage, they found a maze so tight that they had to crawl on their stomachs for meters at a time. The entrance descended through a series of natural fissures into chambers carved and expanded by the Maya. Inside, their headlamps illuminated hundreds of ceramic vessels still in their original positions. Bowls, incense burners, jars, and plates blackened by smoke and stained by mineral-rich water. Many were intact, their lids still sealed. No one had disturbed them since the day they were placed there more than a millennium ago. The first step in the log, documenting conditions. Temperature and humidity were constant, the air heavy with limestone dust. Water dripped from stalactites onto the vessels below, coating them in calcium carbonate that preserved them like fossils. Every artifact was photographed before removal. Each object was measured, mapped, and scanned in 3 dimensions. In total, the team identified over 150 ceremonial items. Second step, identifying the nature of the offerings. The ceramics belonged mostly to the late Classic period, around 700 to 1000 CE, just before Chichen Itza reached its peak. Many vessels contained burnt copal resin used as incense in Maya rituals. Some held food remains, seeds, and fragments of shell and jade. Their arrangement suggested careful choreography. Lines of bowls leading to chambers with central altars, positioned beneath natural cracks where water seeped from above. The Maya saw such places as points of communication with the gods of rain and fertility, especially Chark, lord of storms and water. Third step, spatial mapping. Balamku lies about 3 kilometers east of the Temple of Kukulkan, connected to a broader network of caves and cenotes beneath the city. The layout forms a series of galleries and corridors descending toward the water table. Archaeologists suspect that these subterranean routes were used for ritual pilgrimages, echoing the cosmological journey from the surface world to the watery underworld. The caves of the Yucatan were not considered separate from the city, they were its hidden foundation. Fourth step, contextual evidence. Above ground, Chichen Itza's pyramids, ball courts and temples expressed cosmic order through architecture and astronomy. Below ground, caves like Balamku mirrored that order through natural formations. Excavations show that rituals here involved burning incense, breaking vessels, and depositing offerings as symbolic acts of renewal. Each object served as a messenger to the gods, carried by smoke, scent, and water. Fifth step, preservation status. Unlike the sacred cenote, where artifacts were dragged from water and exposed to the elements, Balamku remained sealed, untouched. No looters, no air circulation, no sunlight. This isolation kept organic materials intact. Copal chunks still aromatic, plant remains identifiable, pigments visible on pottery. Some vessels retain traces of handprints, fingerprints preserved in the clay. The cave became a sealed archive of ritual life frozen in time. Sixth step, interpretation. The offerings correspond to a period of environmental stress and political change. Paleoclimatic data shows episodes of severe drought across the Yucatan around the same centuries. Inscriptions from other Maya sites record appeals to the rain gods and elaborate ceremonies seeking balance. The offerings in Balamku may represent acts of supplication, desperate attempts to restore harmony between humans and nature. Seventh step, connection with other caves. Balamku is not alone. Beneath Chichen Itza lies a vast karst system, riddled with cenotes and tunnels. Nearby caves such as Balamkanche and Holtun contain similar offerings and altars aligned with surface temples. Together, they form an unseen mirror of the city above. When archaeologists plotted these sites on a map, they realized the alignments corresponded with key ritual axes, suggesting intentional design. The builders of Chichen Itza were not just constructing upward, they were building downward into the earth, creating a cosmological duality of sky and underworld. Eighth step, analysis of ritual sequence. In some chambers, soot patterns on the ceiling indicate repeated visits. The burned copal and ceramic kill holes show that offerings were used, then symbolically destroyed before being left behind. The positioning of artifacts near drip points suggests that water, the breath of the cave, was central to the ceremony. When water droplets struck the offerings, it symbolized the gods accepting the gift. Ninth step, modern challenges. Because of the cave's fragility, most artifacts remain in situ. Only limited samples were removed for study. Archaeologists work in teams of 3, alternating to avoid raising temperature or humidity levels. Even breathing can shift the cave's microclimate. The data is recorded through laser scanning and photogrammetry, creating a complete digital reconstruction for further research. 10th step, the sensory record. Inside Balamku, the silence is nearly total. You hear only dripping water, the slow beat of your own pulse, and the scrape of knees against rock. The smell of copal still lingers faintly after 1,000 years. Minerals glisten on the surfaces of pots. The beams of headlamps trace lines of smoke stains across the ceiling. Every chamber feels like a preserved ritual, an act frozen mid-performance. The excavation log ends where it began, with the human sense of awe inside the earth. The Maya who sealed this cave believed they were closing a door to the divine, protecting the balance between surface and underworld. The archaeologists who reopened it found not only objects, but a living record of that belief, untouched, silent, and waiting beneath the city of stone. Sistema Sak Aktun, Yucatan. Beneath the surface of the Yucatan Peninsula lies a hidden labyrinth stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Dark tunnels filled with water, silent chambers, and ancient remains preserved by time. This is Sistema Sak Aktun, the longest known underwater cave system on Earth. Divers who enter its flooded passages pass through a world that once lay open to the sky, a landscape used by early humans and the ancient Maya, later swallowed by rising water. What now feels like an alien environment was once a sacred and inhabited space. At first glance, the Yucatan seems like solid limestone. but below it runs a network of underground rivers created over millennia as rainwater dissolved the rock. These rivers flow through natural sinkholes or cenotes, which open like windows into the underworld. Sac-Actun, meaning white cave in Maya, is part of this larger karst system. In 2018, cave explorers from the Gran Acuífero Maya project discovered that two major systems, Sac-Actun and Dos Ojos, were connected, forming a single network stretching more than 350 kilometers. What they found within went far beyond geology. The exploration logs describe a journey that begins at the surface, in a small cenote surrounded by jungle. Divers descend through a vertical shaft, the light fading as they pass into the blue. At about 10 meters down, the walls open into tunnels that extend in every direction. Stalactites hang like frozen waterfalls, and stalagmites rise from the floor like pillars. In many places, the water is so clear that the boundary between air and stone seems to disappear. The only sounds are the faint hiss of oxygen bubbles and the slow pulse of fins against still water. The first evidence entry concerns human and animal remains. Within Sac-Actun's branches, explorers found bones from extinct Ice Age megafauna, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and bears, alongside early human skeletons. One of the most remarkable discoveries is Naya, the remains of a young woman who lived around 13,000 years ago. Found in a chamber called Hoyo Negro, her skeleton is one of the oldest and most complete in the Americas. Studies of her DNA link her directly to modern indigenous peoples of the Americas, offering key evidence about the first migrations into the continent. The second entry records the Maya presence. Long after Naya's time, during the Classic and Post-Classic periods, the Maya used parts of this same cave system for ritual offerings. Divers have recovered ceramics, jade beads, obsidian blades, and burnt copal resin from ledges and side chambers. Many of these artifacts were placed deliberately at points where light from above disappears entirely, thresholds between visible and invisible worlds. The Maya believed caves and water-filled chambers were portals to Xibalba, the underworld, where gods of rain, death, and fertility resided. Here begins the balance between gate myth and measured data. For the Maya, entering a cave meant crossing from the world of the living into the domain of spirits. Ritual offerings, and sometimes sacrifices, were made to ensure harmony with those forces. For modern science, Sac-Actun reveals not gods but geology and history, a record of climate, migration, and belief preserved by water. Yet both views meet at a point of truth. The cave is a boundary, a liminal space where different worlds connect. Measurements show that the cave system formed during the last ice age, when sea levels were lower and much of the network was dry. As the climate warmed and oceans rose, the caves flooded. The water's low oxygen levels halted decay, preserving organic material for millennia. Stalactites and stalagmites still carry layers of mineral growth that record changes in rainfall and temperature, providing a natural climate archive stretching back tens of thousands of years. Another entry, the distribution of offerings. In sections near Tulum and Koba, divers have mapped dozens of ceramic vessels placed on ledges or within collapsed chambers. Some contain charcoal and traces of copal incense. Others were intentionally broken, the fragments arranged in patterns. Analysis of mineral deposits shows these objects were set in place before the chambers fully flooded, meaning rituals occurred when the caves were partially dry, spaces of twilight and shadow that would later vanish beneath water. Further data comes from underwater mapping. The Gran Acuífero Maya project used laser scanning and 3D photogrammetry to create digital models of the entire network. The images reveal passages that twist through limestone, like arteries, linking cenotes separated by kilometers. In certain areas, human bones lie only a few meters from animal remains, suggesting that early people used these caves both for refuge and ritual before the sea reclaimed them. Within the gate myth framework, the relationship between surface and depth carries profound meaning. Cenotes were seen as eyes of the earth, openings through which life-giving rainwater flowed, and where the spirits of ancestors could travel. In the measured data, those same cenotes mark entrances into the aquifer that still provides water for millions of people today. Myth and science describe the same reality in different languages, one sacred, one analytical. Divers describe the physical sensation of passing through this realm as unlike anything else. At times, the tunnel narrows to the width of a body. At others, it opens into vast domes where beams of sunlight fall from distant openings, scattering through the blue water. Some chambers contain air pockets where dripping sounds echo endlessly. The combination of darkness, silence, and suspension in water creates an experience that feels outside normal time. The evidence ledger continues. Limestone walls covered in soot from ancient torches, marks of human hands preserved by mineral layers, and trails of broken pottery leading deeper into the dark. Carbon dating of artifacts places them between 600 and 900 CE. Isotopic analysis of bones suggests dietary habits typical of the lowland Maya, confirming local participation in these underground rituals. Sakak'tun remains under study, and new sections are discovered each year. The caves link dozens of cenotes across the Yucatan, forming a continuous underground world that blurs the line between myth and geology. For the ancient Maya, these passages were the arteries of the earth, carrying water and spirit alike. For modern archaeologists, they are an immense archive of life, death, and environment preserved in a submerged landscape. Inside the flooded chambers, where ancient footsteps once echoed, there is now only the slow drift of silt and the sound of breathing underwater. The divers' lights sweep across skulls and pottery resting on the floor, untouched for centuries. Each object sits exactly where it was placed, a message from those who once crossed this threshold, now waiting beneath the water in the longest cave on earth, Yazilikaya, Hattusa, Turkiye. High on the Anatolian plateau, near the ruins of the Hittite capital Hattusa, a rocky outcrop rises from the plain. Its walls are cut with deep reliefs, lines of gods marching across stone, their faces worn by 3,000 years of weather. This is Yazilikaya, the inscribed rock, one of the most extraordinary sanctuaries of the late Bronze Age. Here, the Hittites carved their cosmos into the living rock, a map of heaven, earth, and underworld, and, as recent studies suggest, a calendar of the sky itself. The sanctuary stands just outside the city walls of ancient Hattusa, the seat of the Hittite Empire during the 13th century BCE. It consists of two open-air chambers, known as Chamber A and Chamber B, connected by a narrow passage. Both are natural clefts in the limestone hill, their walls smoothed and carved into reliefs depicting gods, goddesses, and mythical beings. When the sanctuary was active, priests and kings entered these chambers to perform rituals to the storm god Teshub and the sun goddess Hepet, the chief deities of the Hittite pantheon. The first chamber opens toward the sky. Its main wall shows a grand procession of deities carved in shallow relief, arranged in two facing lines, male gods on one side, female gods on the other, meeting at the center where the storm god and sun goddess stand together. Each figure is labeled in hieroglyphic script. Their poses are formal, their garments layered with symbolic detail, horned crowns for divinity, short tunics and boots for warriors, flowing robes for fertility deities. Scholars note that the order of the figures mirrors Hittite cosmology, moving from celestial gods to earthly and chthonic ones as the eye travels along the wall. At the far end of Chamber A, the carving of King Tudhaliya IV stands among the gods. He wears the tall hat and robe of a priest, his name inscribed beside him. The relief blends the human and divine, ruler and gods occupying the same space. The positioning of the king here, within the cosmic assembly, may represent his role as mediator between the earthly realm and the divine order. The second chamber, reached through a narrow passage, is darker and deeper. Its reliefs depict underworld deities, figures with animal heads, winged guardians, and representations of the sword god Nergal standing upright with his blade embedded in the ground. Archaeologists believe this chamber symbolized the underworld, the realm of death and transformation. Here too the walls align with celestial directions. Sunlight rarely enters, creating a permanent twilight that enhances the sense of descent. The arrangement of these chambers, one open to the sun, one enclosed in shadow, reflects a deliberate duality: light and dark, sky and underworld, life and death. The Hittites used stone to articulate the structure of their cosmos. Earth stood between sky and underworld, held in balance by divine order. The sanctuaries were not built, they were shaped from existing rock, anchoring faith in the natural world. In recent years, archaeologists and archaeoastronomers have added a new layer of interpretation: Yazilikaya as a cosmic calendar. researchers noticed that the sequence of gods in Chamber A may correspond to days, lunar months, and divisions of the year. The total number of figures, roughly 64, divides neatly into symbolic groups: 12 deities possibly representing lunar months, 30 signifying days, and others marking intercalary or ritual cycles. The direction of the procession and its orientation toward the cardinal points suggest alignment with solar movement. Measurements confirm that the sanctuary's main axis aligns roughly east-west, allowing the light of the setting sun at certain times of the year to reach specific reliefs. Some scholars propose that priests could have used these light patterns to mark seasonal festivals or agricultural timing. In Hittite religion, cosmic order and social order were inseparable. Keeping track of celestial cycles was part of maintaining balance between humans and gods. The rock reliefs themselves act as both text and image. Hittite hieroglyphs identify deities by name: Teshub, Hepat, Sharuma, and titles like Lord of Heaven or Queen of the Sun. The figures are carved in procession, their ranks grouped by function: celestial gods first, then earthly gods, then those of the underworld. The carving's depth varies, creating a rhythmic texture across the stone surface that catches light differently through the day. When sunlight moves across the wall, the gods seem to appear and fade, as if participating in an eternal movement. The material evidence reinforces this cosmic reading. Chamber A shows signs of repeated ritual use: shallow pits for offerings, traces of pigment on the reliefs, and fragments of ceramic vessels found near the base of the walls. Chamber B contains fewer offerings but more complex iconography. The sword god's image, half human and half weapon, anchors the composition like an axis connecting worlds. Beneath his feet, archaeologists found small depressions where libations may have been poured. In the Cosmos in Stone structure, Yazilikaya functions as a carved model of time and universe. The open-air sanctuary links sky and earth, while the inner chamber links earth and underworld. The sequence of gods corresponds not just to pantheon hierarchy, but to the rhythm of celestial motion. The stone itself becomes a living calendar, its reliefs tracking the passage of days and seasons, its orientation binding the rituals of the Hittite state to the turning of the heavens. The sensory experience amplifies this connection. When you enter Chamber A, the rock walls rise around you like the sides of a canyon. The sunlight falls from above, striking the figures at different angles through the day. The air is dry, filled with the scent of grass and dust. As you move toward Chamber B, the light fades, replaced by cool air and shadow. The transition feels deliberate, a movement through levels of existence. Standing before the carved gods, you sense how the Hittites imagined their world: vast, ordered, alive with divine presence. Even after 3,000 years, the reliefs retain their sharpness. Lines of gods still march across the stone, their procession frozen mid-step. For the Hittites, these were not mere carvings, but manifestations of the cosmos itself. Heaven written in rock, time marked in shadow and light. Qin Shi Huang's tomb, China. In the heart of China's Shanxi province, near the city of Xi'an, a mound of earth rises quietly from the plain. It looks like a natural hill, covered with grass and trees, but beneath it lies one of the most ambitious monuments ever built, the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. He ruled from 221 to 210 BCE, and in that short span he reshaped the nation's laws, language, and infrastructure. He also commanded an afterlife palace that mirrored his empire, a world beneath the earth, guarded by the terracotta army, and according to ancient records, surrounded by rivers of liquid mercury. The tomb mound stands at about 50 meters high, though it was once taller. It sits at the center of a vast necropolis stretching for more than 50 square kilometers. Excavations around it since the 1970s have uncovered thousands of life-size clay soldiers, horses and chariots, all buried in precise formation to protect the emperor in the next world. Yet the tomb chamber itself remains sealed. No one has entered it in over 2,000 years. What lies inside is known only through ancient texts and modern technology. The evidence ledger begins with the written accounts. The records of the Grand Historian, written by Sima Qian around 100 BCE, describe the tomb's construction in detail. He wrote that artisans built a replica of the empire underground, complete with palaces, pavilions, and rivers represented by flowing mercury. The ceiling, he said, was decorated with pearls to resemble the stars, while the floor mapped the land and sea. Crossbows were rigged to fire automatically at intruders. Thousands of labourers were said to have worked on the project for decades, sealing themselves inside upon completion to keep its secrets. For centuries, these accounts were treated as myth, too extravagant to be real. But modern surveys began to hint otherwise. In the 1980s and 1990s, researchers using remote sensing and soil sampling found elevated mercury concentrations in the earth surrounding the mound, levels far above the natural background of the region. Later studies confirmed these anomalies, showing patterns consistent with underground channels or reservoirs of mercury vapour. The data suggests that at least some of Sima Qian's description might be rooted in fact. Item 1 in the ledger, soil analysis. Tests conducted near the tomb's base recorded mercury concentrations up to 27 times higher than normal. The distribution of these readings forms irregular lines, perhaps corresponding to the rivers described in the texts. Geochemical studies also detected traces of other metals, indicating the presence of ancient alloys or pigments used for decoration. Item 2. The structure. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic imaging reveal a complex network of chambers beneath the mound, centered around a main burial hall roughly 30 meters underground. The main chamber is believed to be rectangular, enclosed by thick rammed earth walls, with passageways extending outward to subsidiary halls. Each layer of construction appears sealed by clay and charcoal, likely designed to prevent moisture and intrusion. Item 3. The terracotta army and outer features. Over 8,000 clay soldiers have been unearthed, about 1.5 kilometers east of the mound. Each is unique in face and posture. Alongside them are bronze chariots, weapons, and statues of acrobats and musicians. These outer pits appear to function as a military and ceremonial perimeter, a living world recreated in clay to serve the emperor in death. Item 4. Chemical evidence. In 2020, a study from Chinese researchers re-examined soil samples from the site and confirmed persistent mercury anomalies even after decades of exposure. They proposed that liquid mercury sealed inside the tomb may have slowly evaporated through microfractures, releasing vapour detectable at the surface. This phenomenon would explain why the concentration remains highest near the tomb's core and declines outward. Item 5. Preservation and ethics. The tomb remains unopened not for lack of curiosity but for protection. The terracotta warriors themselves began to fade in colour minutes after exposure to air. The pigments that once covered them oxidized and flaked away. Archaeologists fear that opening the central chamber would cause irreversible damage to whatever lies within. The soil chemistry, the ancient mechanisms, and any organic materials could be destroyed in contact with oxygen. For now, non-invasive methods, radar, magnetometry, and spectroscopy are the only tools allowed. The gate myth meets the measured data at this point. In Qin belief, the emperor's power extended beyond death. The tomb was designed as a cosmic mirror, heaven above, earth in between, and the underworld below, all bound together in eternal rule. The rivers of mercury may have symbolized the celestial waters that separate the realms of the living and the dead, a literal boundary that the emperor sought to control. The presence of mercury, toxic and luminous, fits this vision perfectly. It is both substance and symbol, both alchemy and eternity. From a scientific view, mercury would have served a practical purpose as well. It resists decay and bacteria, perhaps intended to preserve the contents of the tomb. Ancient Chinese alchemists associated mercury with immortality. Qin Shi Huang himself was said to have consumed mercury-based elixirs in his search for eternal life. In this sense, the substance inside his tomb may represent his final attempt to master death, an empire of mercury holding the same power he sought in life. Item 6. Environmental legacy. Measurements around the site indicate low-level mercury emissions still detectable today, suggesting that the metal remains sealed in substantial quantity. The distribution aligns with depressions mapped by radar, supporting the interpretation of artificial channels. Some researchers estimate that if the historical descriptions are accurate, the tomb might contain several tons of mercury, possibly in liquid form within bronze basins. The sensory record, reconstructed from the texts, evokes a striking image. Imagine standing inside a vast underground hall lit by the glimmer of mercury flowing through channels, reflecting light onto painted walls. Above, a ceiling studded with pearls forming constellations. Around you, models of mountains and rivers, gold trees, jade birds, miniature palaces. The emperor's body lies in a coffin at the centre, surrounded by guards, treasures and traps. Above it all, tons of earth and stone pressing down, sealing this engineered otherworld for eternity. The instruments of science can detect traces, the vapour of mercury, the voids of hidden chambers, but the full vision remains beyond reach. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang endures as both fact and myth, a gate between what can be measured and what can only be imagined. Grotto di Coseo and Lake Avernus, Italy. In the volcanic landscape west of Naples, the air carries a faint smell of sulphur. The ground is riddled with craters, caves, and lakes formed by ancient eruptions. Among them lies Lake Avernus, a dark, circular body of water surrounded by steep forested slopes. To the Romans, this place was not just a natural wonder. It was the mouth of the underworld. Ancient writers described it as a lake whose vapours killed birds in flight and whose depths led to the realm of the dead. At its edge stands one of Rome's most remarkable feats of engineering, the Grotto di Coseo, a tunnel carved through volcanic rock that connected the lake to the military port of Cumae. Here, myth and infrastructure met in stone. Lake Avernus sits within the Phlegrean Fields, a volcanic region that the ancients associated with fire and the gods of the underworld. The name Avernus comes from the Greek ornos, meaning without birds, a reflection of the ancient belief that its fumes were deadly. To the Romans, this landscape embodied the boundary between life and death. The poet Virgil placed the entrance to Hades here, describing Aeneas's descent into the underworld under the guidance of the Cumaean sibyl. When Roman engineers later pierced the ridge above the lake with a kilometre-long tunnel, they were, in a sense, building directly into myth. The Grotto di Coseo was constructed in the late 1st century BCE under the rule of Agrippa, Augustus's trusted admiral and architect. It served as a military passage linking Lake Avernus, which Agrippa transformed into a naval basin with the port of Cumae on the coast. The tunnel was designed by the engineer Lucius Cocceius Auctus, whose name it still bears. Carved entirely by hand into the soft volcanic tuff, it stretched for about 1 kilometre and stood high enough for carts and troops to pass through. The structure was lined with niches for oil lamps, ventilation shafts to carry fresh air, and side chambers for maintenance or rest. The architectural details remain impressive even now. The main corridor measures roughly 5 metres wide and up to 8 metres high in sections. At regular intervals, vertical shafts rise to the surface, providing both light and air. These shafts double as markers of Roman precision, each perfectly aligned to ensure air circulation along the entire length. Side passages open into small rooms that may have been used as shrines or resting spots for travellers. The walls bear chisel marks, still visible after 2 millennia, showing the rhythm of labour that cut through the living rock. But while the Grotto di Coseo was a product of military engineering, it stood within a landscape steeped in prophecy and fear. Near its western end lay the sanctuary of the Cumaean sibyl, whose cave, the same described by Virgil, was believed to open near the port the tunnel served. To pass through the grotto was to move symbolically between worlds, from the naval base and the sea, realm of commerce and empire, to the lake that mirrored the mythic gateway to Hades. Soldiers and travellers who used the tunnel would have been aware of this dual meaning. The architecture functioned both as a conduit of movement and a corridor of memory, linking empire to the mythic underworld. The witness patchwork comes from ancient sources. Strabo mentioned the deadly air of Avernus and its proximity to the Cumaean sibyl. Virgil described Aeneas approaching the lake under a sky darkened by birds fleeing the fumes. Later Roman writers, including Livy and Pliny, treated the area as both historical and supernatural ground. Pliny recorded that engineers had pierced the mountain near Avernus to open a route to the sea, praising the feat as evidence of Roman mastery over nature. The coexistence of these accounts, poetic and practical, shows how the Romans experienced their world, not divided between myth and reality, but woven from both. Archaeological evidence supports the literary record. Excavations around Lake Avernus have uncovered remains of docks, canals, and retaining walls built by Agrippa when he turned the lake into part of the Portus Julius naval complex. The Grotto di Coseo formed its main access point, allowing ships to move between the inner lake and the outer port. Inscriptions found in the area mention repairs ordered during the reign of Domitian, confirming its continued use for more than a century. Later, during the Middle Ages, parts of the tunnel collapsed and were sealed by landslides. Modern restorations have reopened sections, revealing the original Roman engineering intact beneath layers of ash and soil. The sensory record of the tunnel tells its own story. The air inside is cool and damp, carrying the smell of earth and volcanic minerals. As you walk, sound echoes along the curved walls, the rhythm of footsteps multiplied by stone. Shafts of daylight fall from the ventilation openings above, striking the floor like pale columns. In some sections, the walls widen into arched alcoves, where ancient soot still blackens the ceiling. The experience is both architectural and otherworldly, a literal descent that recalls the journeys described by Roman poets. At the tunnel's eastern mouth, the view opens toward Lake Avernus itself. The water is calm, almost perfectly circular, bordered by dense vegetation. On quiet days, the surface reflects the sky so clearly that it feels like a portal. The Romans once believed that spirits rose through its depths. Today, scientists know that volcanic gases occasionally seep from vents beneath it. The smell of sulfur that fed the ancient myth of deadly vapors is real, a reminder that geology and legend often share the same ground. Standing at this junction of stone and story, you can sense why the Romans saw the world as a dialogue between human craft and divine power. The Grotto di Maeshowe was not just a passage for soldiers, it was an expression of dominion over nature, carved through a landscape once feared as a gate to the underworld. Above, the forested ridge hides the scars of excavation. Below, the dark lake mirrors the sky. The boundary between engineering and myth blurs here, in a place where Rome's precision met its oldest imagination, and the road to empire passed through the shadow of Hades. Plutonian at Eleusis, Greece. Just west of Athens, in the small town of Eleusis, the ground rises into low terraces of pale stone. The air here feels still, even with the modern city nearby. Beneath these terraces lie the remains of one of the most sacred sanctuaries of the ancient world, the site of the Eleusinian mysteries. Pilgrims came from every corner of Greece to be initiated into secret rites, promising renewal after death. At the heart of this complex stood a space known as the Plutonian, a subterranean chamber said to mark the very place where Hades himself rose from the underworld to claim Persephone. The setting of Eleusis joined myth and landscape in a seamless whole. The valley below was fertile, fed by underground springs that made it one of Attica's richest farmlands. The myth of Demeter and Persephone, the story of the goddess of grain and her daughter taken to the underworld, was not only a tale of loss and return, but a reflection of this land's seasonal cycles. In spring, the fields blossomed. In winter they withered, echoing Persephone's descent and re-emergence. The Plutonian, dedicated to Pluto or Hades, gave this myth a physical location. It was not an imagined doorway, but an actual space carved into the earth. Ancient writers described the sanctuary of Eleusis as a series of zones, each more restricted than the last. The outer courtyard welcomed the public. The inner court, the Telesterion, was the great hall where initiates gathered. Beyond it, half hidden by rock, lay the small grotto known as the Plutonian. The geographer Pausanias, writing in the 2nd century CE, noted that this was the place where Hades came up with Kore, referring to Persephone's return to the surface. He described it as a sacred cavern beside the river Cephissus, guarded by priests who alone could approach it. The witness patchwork includes voices from archaeology as well as literature. Excavations at Eleusis have revealed a stone terrace leading to a natural cleft in the rock. Within this cavity, archaeologists uncovered foundations of a small temple, built in the 4th century BCE, with a chamber partly cut into the bedrock. Steps descended into the hollow, which may once have been darkened by wooden beams and a roof. Fragments of altars and votive offerings were found nearby. Terracotta figurines, bronze vessels, and inscriptions naming Demeter, Kore, and Pluto. The site's orientation faces the west, the direction of the setting sun, reinforcing its symbolic link to the underworld and the cycles of death and rebirth. The Plutonian's role in the mysteries is inferred rather than explicitly recorded, since the rites themselves were secret and punishable by death if revealed. Yet the architecture of the sanctuary mirrors the stages of initiation described in later sources: movement from light to darkness, from open spaces to enclosed halls, from the visible to the hidden. The initiate's final revelation, said to take place within the Telesterion, may have involved a ritual representation of Persephone's return, a reenactment of ascent from the Plutonian itself. The material evidence provides structure for this interpretation. The small temple built over the cavern had a rectangular plan about 7 by 10 metres with a pronaos and cellar. Its foundations merge into the rock, as though the building grows out of the earth. The flooring shows cuttings for statues and offering tables. One large stone basin nearby may have held water, used in purification rituals. The surrounding area includes traces of a retaining wall and stairs descending from the main sanctuary level, giving controlled access to the grotto. Everything about the design enforces boundaries, between sacred and profane, between surface and depth. The Plutonian also connects to a wider network of subterranean features in the sanctuary. To its east lies the Callicoron well, where Demeter was said to have rested in her search for Persephone. Water, earth, and darkness formed a triad of sacred elements. The initiates of Eleusis learned through these places that life and death were not opposites but continuations, one descending, one rising. The Plutonian, both tomb and womb, embodied that belief in stone. The witness record continues into later periods. During Roman times, emperors and philosophers alike visited Eleusis to be initiated. Marcus Aurelius funded the reconstruction of the sanctuary after its destruction in 170 CE. In his reign, the Plutonian was remodeled. New masonry lined the grotto, and a marble doorway was added. Inscriptions from this phase mention Pluto and Persephone jointly as divine rulers of the underworld, reflecting a shift toward a more integrated vision of cosmic order. The emperor himself is said to have participated in the rites, descending into the sacred chamber as generations had before him. The cosmos in stone structure of Eleusis becomes clear in the physical layering of the site. The upper terrace with its monumental hall represents the realm of light and revelation. The lower cavern, the Plutonian, marks descent into the earth. Between them lies the path of initiation, a journey mirrored in the agricultural cycle surrounding the sanctuary. Each architectural element aligns with mythic geography: the Well of Morning, the Cave of Return, the Temple of Celebration. The entire sanctuary is a map of transformation inscribed into rock. From an experiential perspective, the Plutonian would have felt different from the vast spaces above it. Inside the chamber, the ceiling pressed low, the air cool and still. Oil lamps flickered against the stone, casting shifting shadows. The sound of chanting from the priests above might have echoed faintly through the passageways. The smell of smoke and earth mingled with incense. For the participants, entering that space meant crossing a threshold between worlds, one not of finality but of renewal. Archaeologists visiting the site today can still trace the outline of the small sanctuary, the steps carved into the rock, and the terrace that faced the sun's descent. The foundations remain partly visible, enclosed within later structures built during Roman restoration. To stand there is to sense the continuity between architecture and myth, between the stone and the story it holds. The Plutonian of Eleusis was not only a chamber, it was a symbol cut into the landscape, a place where belief in the cycles of life and death was given permanent form. Serapeum of Saqqara, Egypt. South of Cairo, in the desert plateau of Saqqara, the wind moves across ancient sand and broken stone. Beneath the surface, carved deep into the limestone bedrock, lies one of Egypt's most remarkable underground monuments, the Serapeum. For centuries it served as the burial place of the sacred Apis bulls, animals believed to embody the god Ptah during life and to merge with Osiris after death. The galleries that stretch below the desert form a labyrinth of corridors and chambers that combine engineering, ritual and theology in perfect alignment. The entrance to the Serapeum begins with a descending corridor cut directly into the rock. The steps lead down into shadow, where the temperature cools and the sound of the outside world disappears. The passage opens into a series of long galleries, each side lined with massive side chambers. Inside these chambers rest granite sarcophagi so large they dwarf a person, monolithic boxes carved with astonishing precision. Each once held the mummified remains of a single Apis bull wrapped, anointed, and buried with the same care given to a king. The evidence ledger begins with the earliest record. The Apis cult was established at Memphis as early as the First Dynasty, around 3000 BCE. The bull represented the living image of Ptah, creator god of craftsmen. Upon its death, the Apis was believed to unite with Osiris, god of the afterlife, becoming a Serapeum, later known to the Greeks as Serapis. The burial of each bull was therefore both a funerary and a cosmic event, a renewal of divine order through the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Item 1. The architecture. The Serapeum's earliest section dates to the reign of Amenhotep III in the 14th century BCE. Later, under the 19th dynasty pharaohs, especially Seti I and his son Ramesses II, the complex expanded into vast subterranean corridors. The main gallery runs over 100 metres long, branching into side chambers, each sealed by massive granite blocks weighing up to 60 tons. The corridors were cut straight and level, illuminated in antiquity by oil lamps whose soot still stains the ceiling. Item 2. The sarcophagi. Each sarcophagus is carved from a single block of granite or basalt, brought from quarries hundreds of kilometres away at Aswan. The workmanship is extraordinary. Flat planes polished smooth, corners perfectly squared, lids fitted with precision. Some bear inscriptions naming the reigning pharaoh and the high priests of Ptah responsible for the burial. Others are unmarked, their surfaces plain, reflecting changes in ritual practice over centuries. The size of these coffins suggests the bulls were considered divine beings, not animals, and their burials acts of state importance. Item 3. Excavation and rediscovery. The Serapeum was rediscovered in 1851 by Auguste Mariette, a French archaeologist working near Saqqara's step pyramid. Following reports of a buried sphinx-lined road, he cleared the sand until he found a sealed doorway leading underground. When he broke through, he entered a gallery filled with sarcophagi, some untouched since antiquity. The sight stunned him. Long corridors vanishing into darkness, each chamber housing a single granite box. The discovery provided the first physical confirmation of texts describing the Apis burials and gave insight into Egypt's long continuity of sacred practice. Item 4. Ritual sequence. Inscriptions from nearby stelae detail how each Apis bull was selected, venerated, and buried. Priests identified a new Apis by specific markings: a white triangle on the forehead, an eagle on the back, and a crescent on the side. The bull lived in Memphis's temple precincts, receiving offerings and public honours. Upon its death, it was embalmed, carried in procession to Saqqara, and buried in the Serapeum. The ceremony involved hymns to Ptah and Osiris, incense, and the sealing of the chamber. The new Apis was then enthroned, ensuring the eternal continuation of the divine presence. Item 5. Sacred landscape. The Serapeum was not isolated. It formed part of a broader ritual geography. A long processional avenue flanked by more than 100 stone sphinxes once connected it to the Temple of Ptah in Memphis. This avenue symbolized the path between the world of men and the divine realm beneath the earth. At its end, priests descended into the galleries, carrying torches and chanting prayers to guide the spirit of the bull to Osiris. The architecture thus became a map of cosmic transition, each descent a movement toward eternity. Item 6. Archaeological finds. In addition to sarcophagi, Mariette's excavation uncovered votive stelae left by worshippers over more than 1,000 years. Many record the names of officials who served the Apis cult, along with prayers for favour in this life and the next. Fragments of alabaster vessels, bronze figures, and faience amulets filled the side chambers. In one section, the mummy of an Apis bull was discovered intact, its wrappings still preserved, accompanied by small gold ornaments. Analysis of these remains has revealed a meticulous embalming process, including the use of resin, linen, and aromatic oils. Item 7. Design and acoustics. The geometry of the corridors produces a remarkable auditory effect. Sounds echo slowly, amplifying voices and footsteps. Even the strike of a tool reverberates like a distant drum. The scale and acoustics suggest that the design was not merely functional but ritual, an architecture of resonance. The priest's chants would have carried through the galleries, turning the stone itself into an instrument of worship. The structure of the Serapeum reflects the philosophy of oracle and architecture. Each chamber served as a dialogue between the living and the divine. The massive sarcophagi, the narrow passages, the sense of immensity underground. All were designed to evoke awe and communicate with unseen powers. The bulls, embodiments of Ptah, were entombed within the earth to join Osiris, uniting creation and resurrection in a single act. The architecture itself spoke the language of eternity, depth, silence, and order. Standing inside the Serapeum today, the visitor moves through darkness interrupted only by dim lights. The granite walls absorb sound. The air feels ancient, dense, cool. The sarcophagi line the corridor like silent sentinels. Dust glints in the beams of lamps, revealing inscriptions carved by hands long gone. It is a world engineered to last forever, a network of halls not meant for the living but for gods passing through. The stones still hold the weight of ritual, the breath of torches, and the echo of prayers that once rose from this place, where architecture and afterlife met beneath the desert. Pyramid of the Moon Tunnel, Teotihuacan. At the northern end of Teotihuacan's Great Avenue of the Dead, the Pyramid of the Moon rises against the Cerro Gordo mountain, mirroring its shape. Visitors see a monumental staircase climbing toward the sky, but what lies beneath is what has drawn the attention of archaeologists in recent years. In 2017, a team from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History used geophysical scanning to detect a tunnel hidden deep under the pyramid, an unexcavated passage that may connect to chambers representing the underworld. The discovery added a new layer to a city already famous for its subterranean secrets. The excavation log begins decades earlier. Since the 1960s, archaeologists have explored the Pyramid of the Moon, uncovering successive construction phases stacked like shells, each built over an earlier one. Inside those layers, they found rich burials containing human sacrifices, greenstone figures, obsidian blades, and animal offerings, jaguars, eagles, and serpents. These finds revealed that the pyramid was not simply a temple but a ceremonial axis linking sky, earth, and underworld. Still, no one suspected there might be a tunnel directly beneath it until the 21st century. In 2017, researchers led by Veronica Ortega and Denise Argote conducted a series of electrical resistivity and ground-penetrating radar surveys to map the soil under the pyramid's base. The instruments sent electric currents and radar pulses through the ground, measuring variations that indicated voids or denser material. The data revealed an anomaly, a large linear cavity running from the center of the plaza toward the pyramid's core, about 10 meters below the surface. Its shape and orientation closely resembled the ritual tunnels previously discovered under the Pyramid of the Sun and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. The first log entry, Discovery Parameters. The tunnel appears to begin in the plaza before the pyramid, extending inward for nearly 30 meters. It lies between natural layers of volcanic soil and fills, suggesting it was deliberately excavated by Teotihuacan's builders over 1,800 years ago. The resistivity readings show a pattern consistent with human-made architecture rather than a natural fissure. Second entry, Spatial Orientation. The tunnel aligns with the city's master grid, oriented about 15.5 degrees east of north, precisely matching the layout of Teotihuacan's other major monuments. This alignment has long been interpreted as cosmological, marking astronomical events such as the passage of the sun on specific dates of the ritual calendar. The consistent geometry across the city's structures indicates deliberate design, possibly linking all major pyramids through symbolic underworld axes. Third entry, Comparative Context. The 1971 excavation of the Pyramid of the Sun uncovered a 100-meter-long tunnel leading to a chamber at its center, thought to represent the womb of the earth. In 2003, another tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent revealed thousands of offerings, including jade, shells, and liquid mercury, evoking rivers of the underworld. The newly detected cavity under the Pyramid of the Moon fits this pattern, a triad of monuments connected by invisible corridors, mirroring the mythic geography of the cosmos. Fourth entry, Physical Data. The geophysical readings indicate that the tunnel at the Moon Pyramid lies at a depth of roughly 8 to 10 meters and measures 2 to 3 meters in height. At its probable endpoint, the instruments registered a broader zone of low resistance, possibly a chamber about 15 meters in diameter. The edges show signs of backfill or collapse, suggesting that access was intentionally sealed in antiquity. No excavation has yet been made. All findings come from non-invasive imaging. Fifth entry, Historical Phases. The pyramid itself underwent at least 7 major construction phases between 100 BCE and 450 CE. Each new layer enclosed ritual offerings and sometimes human sacrifices, often aligned with astronomical or calendrical cycles. The tunnel likely belongs to one of the early phases, perhaps connected to the foundation rituals when the first pyramid was built. These early tunnels often functioned as symbolic routes anchoring temples to the underworld, a bridge between creation and the divine realm below. 6th entry, geological context. Teotihuacan was built on an ancient lava field where natural caves already existed. The city's founders expanded or reshaped these caves into artificial passages, using them as sacred spaces for rituals invoking fertility and rain. The Pyramid of the Moon sits directly above one of these natural cavities, which may have been incorporated into the design of the later structure. Volcanic rock provides stable walls but also allows for precise carving, a feature exploited throughout Teotihuacan's underground architecture. 7th entry, ritual interpretation. Archaeologists believe these tunnels represented paths to the underworld, or Mictlan in central Mexican cosmology. The offerings and sacrifices found in earlier excavations suggest that ceremonies involved descent into the earth, perhaps reenacting creation myths in which gods emerged from darkness to form the world. The Moon Pyramid's tunnel may have served as the physical centre for such rituals, connecting the plaza where the people gathered to the hidden space of divine transformation. 8th entry, environmental and technical notes. The 2017 survey faced difficulties due to dense construction layers and groundwater infiltration. Specialized instruments with low-frequency radar waves were used to penetrate the compact volcanic soil. The final imaging data, processed in 3D, confirmed the tunnel's continuous shape and the presence of at least one sealed chamber. Plans for excavation were postponed to prevent destabilizing the pyramid's foundations. Instead, archaeologists installed humidity sensors to monitor the subsurface environment. 9th entry, mythic resonance. In ancient times, the Pyramid of the Moon was associated with the great goddess of Teotihuacan, a deity of water, fertility, and the Earth's surface. Her image appears on murals throughout the city, framed by flowing streams and trees sprouting from her body. The tunnel beneath her pyramid may represent her womb, the source of both life and death. The descent through darkness mirrored the seasonal cycle of growth and renewal, a theme central to Teotihuacan's ideology. 10th entry, present status. The tunnel remained sealed and unexcavated, but the data continued to be analysed. The cavity's outline and its proximity to the pyramid's core suggest that it could contain ritual deposits, human remains, or even early construction altars. For now, the only access to this world comes through the maps generated by radar, the ghostly images of empty space beneath the stone. Inside that darkness, the instruments detect silence. The readings translate the invisible into lines and colours, revealing the deliberate symmetry of a lost design. Beneath the pyramid's massive steps, beneath the plaza where festivals once filled the air with drums and incense, the tunnel waits. Another axis carved into the earth, another connection between Teotihuacan's surface grandeur and the unseen world below. Xochicalco Observatory Cave, Mexico. High above the valleys of central Mexico, on a hilltop fortress once surrounded by steep ravines, lies the ancient city of Xochicalco. Its name means the place of the House of Flowers, but beneath the stone plazas and terraces, deep inside the hill itself, is a chamber unlike any other in Mesoamerica. Hidden below the surface, a man-made cave opens into darkness. From its ceiling, a vertical shaft pierces upward through solid rock. For just a few days each year, a shaft of sunlight descends through this opening, illuminating the chamber below with a white, silent column of light. The ancient builders of Xochicalco turned stone into a mirror of the cosmos, an observatory of both the sky and the underworld. The cave sits beneath the Acropolis of Xochicalco, in today's state of Morelos, Mexico. The city flourished during the Epiclassic period, between 700 and 900 CE, after the decline of Teotihuacan. Its builders constructed pyramids, terraces, and ball courts, fortified by walls, suggesting a time of competition and migration among Mesoamerican peoples. The cave beneath the site, however, was not defensive, it was ritual. Archaeologists believe it was carved intentionally to connect heaven and earth through a beam of light that moved with the sun. The descent begins through a narrow passage that slopes down from a small entrance near the surface. The air cools immediately. The walls, smooth and slightly damp, bear the marks of ancient tools. After about 20 meters, the passage opens into a wider chamber, an oval space roughly 5 meters across. From its ceiling rises a vertical shaft 10 meters high, leading straight to the surface. When the sun passes directly overhead around mid-May and late July, light streams down the shaft and strikes the floor. The effect is precise. The beam forms a circle of light that travels across the chamber as the hours pass, marking both time and season. This is the first entry in the Cosmos in Stone record. The alignment of the shaft is calculated to match the zenith passage of the sun, a phenomenon that occurs only in the tropics. On those days when the sun stands directly above, no shadows are cast, an event ancient astronomers watched carefully to track the agricultural calendar. The builders of Xochicalco captured that moment and fixed it in architecture, turning a cave into a living calendar. The second entry concerns the dual nature of the space. In Mesoamerican cosmology, caves represented entrances to the underworld, the womb of the earth where life originated and to which it returned. The vertical shaft, channeling sunlight from the sky, joined this underworld to the heavens above. The result was a sacred axis, an artificial world tree carved through stone. It united three realms, sky, surface and below, in a single place. The builders effectively turned the earth itself into a cosmic instrument, harmonizing light, darkness and sound. The acoustic quality of the chamber is the next note in the log. Visitors who stand at its center and speak softly hear their voice echo with clarity. The rounded walls amplify sound without distortion, creating a lingering resonance. Archaeologists studying the cave in the 1970s noted that the acoustics were deliberate. The chamber's shape and size correspond closely to known resonant designs found in temples and caves elsewhere in Mesoamerica. The voice of a priest chanting beneath the shaft would have filled the chamber like a living vibration, the sound rising with the sunlight. The combination of light and sound, stone and air, suggests the builders understood not only geometry but perception. The material evidence supports the ritual use. Excavations inside the cave revealed traces of burning ceramic fragments and small offerings such as obsidian flakes and figurines. There are no burials or domestic remains. The soot on the ceiling and the worn floor indicate repeated use over many generations. The entrance passage shows smoothing from continuous movement, people entering, kneeling, perhaps waiting for the moment the light descended. The walls show no decoration, as if the experience itself was the message. Scholars connect the Xochicalco cave with broader Mesoamerican astronomical traditions. At Monte Alban in Oaxaca, temples were aligned with solstices and equinoxes. At Palenque, the Temple of the Sun and the Temple of the Cross recorded solar movement through architecture. But Xochicalco's cave is unique in that it lies underground, not above. The observation of the sun happens from below, from within the earth. This inversion of perspective carries symbolic weight. It transforms the act of watching the heavens into an act of descending. The observer becomes part of the earth while measuring the sky. The experience of the zenith passage is precise and ephemeral. On the chosen days, the sunbeam enters the shaft between midday and early afternoon. At first, a faint glow appears on the upper walls. Then, as the sun reaches its highest point, the light grows intense, forming a pure circular column that moves slowly across the floor. The chamber brightens for a few minutes, and then the light fades as the sun shifts. For the rest of the year, the cave remains in near-total darkness. The cycle repeats, marking agricultural and ceremonial time. The sound and stone structure deepens this connection. When the beam appears, the light interacts with the acoustics. The air warms slightly, creating subtle shifts in echo and tone. Some researchers have suggested that instruments, conch shells, flutes or drums, were played during these moments, turning the space into a sensory ritual. The light becomes rhythm, and rhythm becomes measure, a fusion of cosmic observation and human ceremony. The shaft itself shows careful workmanship. Its walls are smooth, tapering slightly toward the top to control the angle of the incoming sunlight. The upper opening is framed by carved stone blocks that protect it from erosion and direct the beam. This precision indicates a deep understanding of solar geometry. The builders must have observed the sun's path for years before cutting the shaft. The cave's alignment matches not only the zenith dates but also points in the agricultural calendar when maize planting and rains were expected to begin. From an archaeological standpoint, the cave functions as both observatory and sanctuary. The act of descending into the earth to witness the sun's light embodied the union of opposites: darkness and illumination, death and fertility, earth and sky. It was a visual and spiritual enactment of balance. The silence within, broken only by the echo of footsteps and the occasional drip of water, amplified the sense of being between worlds. When sunlight floods the chamber, the beam strikes the floor as if connecting the surface above to a hidden core below. It is a line drawn between heaven and underworld, a passage of light carved in stone. The builders of Xochicalco achieved a perfect union of engineering and belief. A cave that watches the sun, a temple that listens, and a monument where the cosmos itself leaves its signature each year in the form of a single, falling ray of light. Beneath the surface of our world lie the echoes of ancient faiths and forgotten builders. Their stones still mark the line between earth and the unknown. Whether called a tomb, a temple, or a gate, each site speaks of humanity's oldest search, to find what waits beyond the light, and to leave a path that others can follow.